Picture the most beautiful woman you've ever seen. Now imagine she woke up 3 hours before you did, in a room so cold her breath came out in clouds, and spent those first 3 hours on her knees on a floor, hard enough to leave permanent marks on the bone, practicing a song she already knows perfectly. For a teacher who hasn't smiled in 11 years. Picture that the gorgeous silk kimono you admire costs more than her family will ever earn, and she is not allowed to touch it unless someone tells her to. Picture that the perfect white face you see in woodblock prints took 45 minutes to apply, and will be scraped off tonight with a cloth that smells like old grease, leaving skin so dry it cracks in winter. Picture that she is not allowed to eat until the teacher eats, and the teacher is never hungry before noon. That's Edo. That's the Hanamachi. That's the flower district of the greatest city in the world, in a country so deliberately sealed from the outside that the only map most people have of it is a poem. A city of 1 million people when London had half that. A city of canals and bridges and the smell of rice cooking and cedarwood smoke and the particular sweetness of night soil that every Japanese city carries like a signature underneath everything else. A city where you could watch a kabuki performance in the afternoon and step over a man dying of cold 2 blocks later. A city where beauty is a profession and a profession is a cage, and the cage is gilded so precisely that you sometimes forget it has bars. We're going back there tonight, not to see the geisha in her moment of performance, kneeling across a low table from some merchant who's paying enough for one evening to feed a family of farmers for a year. You've seen that image. You know that image. The white face, the crimson lips, the shamisen balanced just so, the pour of sake so precise it looks like water becoming art. We're going to the hours before that, the hours after, the hours nobody talks about and nobody pays for and nobody remembers when they're watching her smile and thinking she must live like this all the time. We're going to the floor at 4 a.m, the calluses on the fingertips, the aching knees and the burning shoulders and the hunger that never fully goes away because appetite is considered unrefined. We're going to the social machine that makes her possible, the women above her and below her and beside her, who all exist in a hierarchy so precise it has its own grammar, its own forms of violence, its own forms of protection. I make these history stories, and honestly I have no idea if anyone actually sleeps to them, or if you're all just people who enjoy hearing about the specific texture of suffering in historical Japan. Either way, get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open before the bell sounds. They always do now. Your body has learned the rhythm of the okiya the way a river learns the shape of its banks, not because anyone chose this, but because the alternative is worse. The bell sounds, and then older sister's voice sounds, and then the sound of feet on the corridor, and if you are not already on your knees by the time all of that happens, the day begins with the reprimand that will sit in your chest until evening. So you wake before the bell. The room is dark, not the polite darkness of a room with curtains, but the real darkness of a room with no lantern lit, and shutters closed against the November air, which has teeth in Edo even before winter properly arrives. You know where you are before you're fully awake because of the smell. Every room in every okiya has this particular combination, rice paper and cedar beams going soft with age, and the ghost of incense from the night before, and the deeper smell underneath everything, which is the smell of women sleeping in a small space, which is the smell of skin and hair and warm breath, and the specific sweetness of oil-based face paint that never fully comes out of fabric no matter how many times you wash it. That last smell. You've stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the sound of a river when you live beside it long enough. But on the mornings when you surface from sleep quickly, before the full machinery of your mind catches up, you catch it fresh. White paint, camellia oil, old silk holding the smell of 100 nights you weren't there for. Welcome to the Shimbashi Hanamachi Edo in the 43rd year of the Bunsei era, which is to say, late autumn of what the Dutch traders in Nagasaki would call 1820, though that number means nothing to you. What means something is that it is cold and it is dark, and somewhere in this house a fire has already been lit by whoever woke before you, which is either older sister or the Oka-san herself, and you have perhaps 15 minutes before the morning training begins. You are 15 years old. Your name, the name you were given here and use here and will use until you either leave or rise to something better, is Yukio, Snow Evening. Someone chose that name for you before you arrived, based on what season it was and what impression they wanted to make, the way you'd name a horse something that sounded fast. Your real name is Hana. Nobody uses it. You've been in this house for 2 years. You came from a village in Kazook province with your mother's handprint on a contract and enough debt attached to your existence that you won't finish paying it off until you're 23, if everything goes well, which it probably won't because nothing ever fully goes well, and the debt has a way of growing when you're not looking, when someone decides you needed a new obi sash or an extra lesson in tea ceremony, or repairs to the shamisen you didn't break but were blamed for anyway. The futon beside you is empty. Smaller sister, whose real name is also something else, and whose okiya name is Haruko, spring child, is already gone. She wakes faster than you do, and is therefore further along in the morning's hierarchy of tasks. This means she has already fetched the water from the cistern in the courtyard, and started the fire in the teaching room, which means you are already behind her in the invisible race that every day is, and you haven't even stood up yet. You push back the futon. The air hits you immediately, cold and precise, like the first note of a shamisen string before the overtones arrive. You're wearing a sleeping kimono, thin cotton, nothing like the weighted silk of the training kimonos, and you pull the collar tighter around your throat before you stand. The floor is cypress planks worn smooth by decades of feet, and this morning they are cold enough through your tabi socks that you can feel the temperature of the boards through 3 layers of cotton. This is the thing that nobody who has never lived in a Japanese house in winter fully understands, the way cold works through a floor. Western buildings trap heat, or so you've been told by Oka-san, who heard it from someone who heard it from one of the Dutch merchants who come through Edo on their annual procession to the shogun's castle. In Japanese houses, the cold comes up from below. It finds the gaps in the foundation where the structure sits on its stone piers, it moves through the airspace under the floor, and it arrives at the boards and then at your feet as something very much like intention. You've been cold every morning for 2 years. You no longer complain about it. Complaining was tried in the early months and produced looks from older sister that contained entire lectures delivered without a word, and so now you simply accept the cold as part of what morning is. The corridor to the teaching room is 8 steps. You know because you counted them once, early on, in the way you count things when you're trying to find something solid in a place that feels like it might dissolve. 8 steps, each one a slightly different shade of cedar, each one creaking in its own register, so that if you know the floor you can move along it almost silently. You know the floor now. You put your weight on the outer edge of each board, where the wood is firmer, where the nails hold better. You make almost no sound. The teaching room is at the end of the corridor, the room that faces the small garden, which is not much of a garden, which is 3 carefully shaped stones and a pine tree. The okiya prunes herself on the second Sunday of every month, with the concentration of someone performing surgery. There is light under the sliding door, a yellowish, wavering light, which means a lamp, and there is sound, which means you are later than you thought. You slide the door open, the teaching room, 8 tatami mats, which means roughly 13 feet by 13 feet, which is the space that contains most of your education and a significant percentage of your suffering. The tatami themselves are fresh this year, a pale gold green that will darken to the colour of straw by spring. They smell of the sea, faintly, which is what new tatami always smells like. The rush grass they're woven from carrying the ghost of whatever water it grew beside. You have always liked this smell. It is one of the small free pleasures of the okiya, a smell that belongs to nobody and costs nothing and lasts for a few weeks every autumn before it fades into the background. Older sister is already kneeling in front of the shamisen stand. Her name here is Fumiko, a writing girl, and she is 19 and has been a fully initiated geisha for 2 years, and carries herself with the quiet, settled authority of someone who knows what she's doing even when she doesn't. Her hair is already up, which means she woke even earlier than you, or slept with it pinned, which some of the older women do, sleeping on the high wooden pillow that looks like something you'd rest a sword on, and probably does about the same amount of damage to your neck. The okiya is not in the room. This means you're not yet in trouble, which is different from being fine. Haruko is in the far corner with a cloth, wiping down the surface of the low table where the tea things are kept. She doesn't look up when you enter, but there's a slight shift in her shoulders, a small acknowledgement. You have been sharing a room and a morning routine long enough to develop this kind of communication. You both know what the other silences mean. It's the language of people who can't afford to speak freely. You go to your place on the tatami, second position, measured from the tokonoma alcove, which contains a hanging scroll. The okiya changes with the seasons, and right now shows a brushwork crane standing in snow, its head bowed, which you have decided means something you're not sure of. You have a way of deciding that things mean something when you don't know what else to do with them. You kneel, and this is the first physical fact of the day, the thing that begins every day and that you've stopped noticing, but that your body records regardless. The particular sensation of folding your legs under you with your weight entirely on your heels and the tops of your feet flat against the tatami. Seiza, the formal sitting position. Beautiful from the outside, which you know because you've seen yourself in the mirror that stands in the corner of the makeup room, kneeling properly in a formal kimono, and the line of it is genuinely lovely, the spine straight, the hands quiet on the thighs, the whole body collected into something that looks intentional. From the inside, after the first 10 minutes, it is a specific kind of discomfort that begins at the ankles and spreads upward. After 30 minutes, it becomes something closer to pain, a deep, insistent pressure on the top of the feet where the bones push against the floor, a spreading numbness in the calves that moves toward the knees. After an hour, which is how long the morning practice session lasts, you stand by pushing yourself up on your hands because your legs have gone to something between sleep and not there, and you stand carefully because the first 30 seconds of full weight on those feet produces something you've heard the older women call ants in the legs, which does not capture it, which is actually more like standing on 2 clubs of wood while someone drives a heated wire along the bone from ankle to knee. This is normal. All of them live with this. Older sister has permanent redness on the tops of both feet from years of sitting this way. The Okasan's knees, when she occasionally lets you see them, are swollen at the caps in a way that seems wrong. The joints rounded too large, the skin across them stretched and faintly shiny. She's 41 years old and has been kneeling on tatami floors since she was 7. Her knees are the price. You settle into position. Older sister has already begun to play. The shamisen. You want to talk about the shamisen because it's one of those things that sounds simple until you actually try to do it, and then it becomes this vast, merciless instrument that reveals every error you've ever made and several errors you haven't made yet. 3 strings, a long neck, a drum-shaped body covered with cat or dog skin, played with a plectrum called a bechi that looks like a spatula and functions like a test. The sound it makes when played well is something between a guitar and a lute, and something that has no equivalent in anything you'd be familiar with. A dry, resonant sound with a particular bite to it. A slight buzzing edge that the Japanese call sawari, which means something like a beautiful obstacle. A sound technique that involves deliberately letting the lowest string vibrate against a groove in the nut so it produces a controlled imperfection. A buzz that is not an accident. You've been playing for 2 years. You're not good yet. You will not be good for another 2 years at minimum, possibly 3, possibly never, because older sister at 2 years was apparently much further along than you are, which is something you've heard stated directly only once, and indirectly approximately every 3rd morning of your life. You pick up your bachi. You find your position. You play the opening phrase of the piece you've been assigned this week, a passage from a Nagauta piece, which is a long-form vocal and shamisen composition associated with kabuki theatre, and the sound you produce is technically correct in terms of notes and timing, and almost right in terms of touch. But something about the way you're holding the plectrum means the attack is slightly too heavy, too definite, where it should be a suggestion rather than a statement. Older sister stops playing. She turns to look at you. She doesn't speak, but she makes a small, precise gesture toward her own hand, the way she's holding her bachi, the angle of the wrist, the slight relaxation in the first 2 fingers, the way the plectrum barely rests in the hollow between thumb and forefinger rather than being held. You adjust. You play the phrase again, better. Close enough that she turns back to her own music. Outside the garden window, which is a thin lattice of cedar that does essentially nothing to keep out the cold, but does blur the view of the neighbour's wall into something almost picturesque. The sky is beginning to separate from the darkness, the deep black of the hours before 4 becoming something slightly less absolute. You can hear the canal. The Shimbashi district is threaded through with water, narrow channels that were dug centuries before you were born to carry goods and waste, and people from one part of the city to another. And in the early mornings when the traffic hasn't started yet, the water has a sound, a particular combination of small movements and the distant creak of boats, and the occasional slap of something you don't want to identify against the stone banks. You play. The rhythm of the practice establishes itself, which is not really a rhythm so much as a discipline. The same passages over and over until the error is gone, and then the next passage, and then the one after that. And the whole thing moving forward with the inexorability of water finding its level. Your back hurts. It's been hurting since October when the temperature dropped. An ache in the lower spine from sitting straight for hours every day. The muscles along the sides of the spine holding that position against gravity, and the cold making them tighten in a way that compounds the effort. You don't move to adjust it. Moving, without permission or reason, during practice is a thing you tried once, in the early months. rolling your shoulders slightly to release the tension, and the look that older sister gave you was so complete in its disapproval that you have not done it since. You sit straight. You play. This is the first hour of your day. Nobody is paying for this. Nobody will pay for this. This hour exists to create the product that other hours will sell, which is a kind of math that takes years to fully understand if you ever do. The way all the hours of suffering and practice and hunger and cold are investments in a particular kind of beauty that other people will pay to be near. That's the business. And right now, at 4:30 in the morning on a November day in Edo, you're at the very bottom of it. The foundation that nobody sees, the part that doesn't make it into the woodblock prints. The shamisen makes its dry, buzzing sound in the cold room. The lamp throws shadows on the paper walls. Somewhere in the house the okiya will be awake, drinking her morning tea in her room, listening to check that the practice has started on time. She does this every morning. You know she does this because older sister told you in one of her rare moments of directness, sitting in the bath one evening, both of them finally off duty from the performance of being a geisha, her voice entirely flat. She listens every morning. She knows if we're late. She knows if we've cut the practice short. She always knows. The okiya. Let's talk about the okiya. Her name, her house name, is Okiya Katsuragi. Her actual name is probably something much simpler, a name from wherever she was before she was here, a name from whatever family decided she was worth putting into the business of beauty. She is 41 years old, as mentioned, and she has the face of someone who was once the thing you're trying to become, and the eyes of someone who understands exactly how the transformation works and exactly what it costs, and has decided that the cost is appropriate. She is not cruel. You want to be clear about this because it would be easier in some ways if she was simply cruel, if the suffering of the okiya had a single clear source that you could resent cleanly. She is not cruel. She is precise. There is a difference that is very important to understand if you're going to live in this house. She provides food. She provides clothing of extraordinary quality. She provides education in skills that take most people a decade to acquire at the level of competence, and a lifetime to acquire at the level of artistry. She provides a career path and a social position that, in a country where women of your class have approximately 3 options, marriage, domestic service, or starvation, is genuinely valuable. She also owns, through the mechanism of your debt, a considerable portion of your next 8 years. This is the trade. You understood it when your mother pressed her handprint to the contract. Your mother understood it too, though she cried afterward, which you know because your mother's sister told you in the last letter you received, which was 14 months ago. You play the shamisen. The phrase comes easier on the 4th repetition, the wrist beginning to find the right angle without having to think about it. This is what practice is actually for, not the learning of the thing, but the making of it automatic. The migration of skill from the conscious mind, which is slow and effortful and shows on the face into the body, which can do it without thinking, which can perform while you're actually paying attention to something else. A geisha who has to think about her shamisen technique while playing is a geisha whose attention is in her hands when it should be on the man across the table. Haruko has finished with the table and is now kneeling at the other end of the room with her own shamisen. She's 13. She's been here for 6 months. She plays as though the instrument has personally wronged her, with a quality of attack that is technically called chikara gahairu, too much strength, but which actually means she is scared of it. You know this because you played the same way in your first 6 months. You played it with fear because the instrument was enormous and unfamiliar, and the stakes of playing it wrong, in terms of the disapproval that followed, felt disproportionate to everything. You held it too tight. You hit the strings too hard. You tried to control the sound rather than make it. You want to tell her this. You want to say it's not about control, it's about something closer to suggestion, like how you don't push a boat, you guide it. But you are not older sister. You are the middle level of this small hierarchy, and the middle level speaks only when spoken to in matters of instruction, and so you keep your thoughts to yourself and play the phrase again. 5 in the morning. The sky outside is now a dark grey blue, the kind that arrives before sunrise and lasts only long enough to make you think about things you'd rather not think about. This is the light that shows up in old Japanese paintings, this specific colour, ink diluted almost to nothing, and it has a quality of openness about it, a vulnerability that the full darkness doesn't have. In the full dark, things are simply not visible. In this light, things are visible but unreal. The garden stones look like they're floating. The pine tree looks like a brush stroke rather than a plant. The bell sounds from somewhere along the canal, not a clock bell, which is a Western thing that Edo doesn't have in the way you're thinking of, but a temple bell, one of the dozens of Buddhist temples that are distributed through the city, like the notes of a chord, each one sounding in its own key and at its own rhythm, so that the city has this constant background texture of bronze being struck by rope-wrapped logs, a sound that is at once ancient and extremely present, that you feel in your chest when it's close enough, and in the backs of your teeth when it's carried on wind from a distance. Haruko, older sister's voice, not loud, never loud. Your grip. Haruko adjusts. Her face shows nothing. This is also something you both have in common, the training of the face, the early and insistent education in the idea that what you feel and what your face shows are not the same thing, and do not need to be the same thing, and in fact should actively not be the same thing. Older sister's face almost never moves through its full range of expression. The Okasan's face barely moves at all. The older geisha you see at the evening parties, the ones with the fully established reputations and the clients who have been coming to this house for 20 years, their faces are like carved wood, not cold, actually warm, actually inviting, but the invitation is entirely controlled, the warmth is entirely chosen, nothing escapes accidentally. You're still learning this. 15 is young for it. Your face sometimes tells things you didn't intend. The practice continues. After the shamisen, which takes an hour, comes the singing practice, which takes another hour, and which is in some ways harder than the shamisen because you can hear a bad note from your shamisen and correct it. But your voice is what your voice is, and changing it requires a different kind of work, a daily reshaping of the instrument that you are. The slow training of the muscles in the throat and the diaphragm and the space behind the nose where the sound resonates or doesn't. The style you're learning, nagauta, requires a particular timbre, a kind of controlled brightness that sits at the top of the chest rather than the bottom of the throat, and finding it every morning is like finding the same door in a house you keep rearranging in your sleep. Your voice is your best quality. The Okasan said this once, in her way of saying things that are compliments only if you understand the context, which is that she said it in front of older sister, who is a better shamisen player but whose voice, while technically correct, doesn't carry the natural resonance yours does. You've been living with the complicated aftermath of this assessment for a year. Older sister's regard for you contains a small splinter, that neither of you acknowledge. You sing the passage. Older sister, who is accompanying on shamisen, listens with the side of her face, not looking at you directly but tracking. When you flatten a note slightly on the fourth beat of the third phrase, she plays it again without stopping, plays the same passage, a hint, a correction delivered through the strings rather than words. You adjust, you sing it again. This is how the teaching works. Very few direct corrections, mostly suggestion. The okiya-san will sometimes speak directly during formal practice sessions, will sometimes say a word like timing or breath, or once, memorably, you're thinking about it, which was simultaneously the most and least helpful thing anyone has ever said to you about performing. You're thinking about it. Stop thinking about it, just do it. How do you stop thinking about a thing while you're doing the thing? This is the question that occupies a significant portion of your mental energy, which is itself the problem, which is itself the proof that you're still thinking about it. 7 a.m, practice ends. The release from seiza is its own ritual. You rise from kneeling the way you've been taught, pressing your hands into the tatami and lifting the weight off your heels before your legs fully extend, rising in a single controlled movement that is supposed to look effortless and still doesn't quite, though you're closer than you were. Your feet take the weight, and there's the familiar rush of sensation, the blood returning, the nerves waking up, the first few steps slightly unsteady as your legs remember how to be legs. Older sister is already standing with her back straight, no visible difficulty, her shamisen replaced in its case with the same precise movements she brings to everything. She turns to you and Haruko. Breakfast in 15 minutes, after the dance lesson starts at 8. Don't be late. She leaves. Haruko sits for a moment on the tatami before rising, the way the youngest always does when they think no one is watching. A brief return to the floor, a moment of just existing before the next demand arrives. You pretend not to see it. You remember doing it. Breakfast happens in the small room behind the kitchen, which is connected to the main house by a covered walkway, open on one side to the garden. The walkway in November is essentially a corridor of cold air, and you move through it quickly, the smell of the kitchen reaching you before you arrive. Rice, which is always rice. Rice at every meal in every house in every part of this city. White rice that fills you in the way that anything starchy fills you, substantially in the moment and with a speed that means you'll be hungry again before noon. With it this morning, miso soup with tofu and wakame seaweed, which has a smell that's the distilled essence of the sea, a mineral salt smell that is both appetizing and slightly unsettling this early, and a small dish of pickled plum, umeboshi, which is the hardest thing for newcomers to learn to love and which you now eat with something approaching devotion. The kitchen is the warmest room in the house. The wood-burning stove that the cook, a woman named Tomo who's been here longer than older sister and communicates primarily through the sounds she makes while moving through the kitchen, has been going since before the practice started. The warmth is physical and immediate in a way that makes your hands and face ache slightly as they come back to temperature, the kind of pain that comes before relief. Tomoe sets the trays on the low table. You kneel. Haruko kneels. Older sister, who arrived before you, is already eating, which means you can eat, and the hierarchy of this is so ingrained by now that you don't think about it consciously. Just adjust your body to the permission. The miso is hot. Hot enough to feel all the way down a line of warmth from the throat to the stomach. The rice has the slightly sticky texture of properly cooked Japanese rice. Each grain distinct, but the whole thing cohesive, and you eat with the chopsticks held correctly because even when no one is watching, older sister is always watching, and you learned this the hard way in month 2 when you thought you were alone at breakfast and ate quickly and sloppy, and looked up to find her standing in the doorway with an expression that required no words. The pickled plum is sour enough to make the back of your jaw hurt pleasantly. You eat it slowly, the way you've learned to eat the things that are good, slowly, and without drawing attention to the pleasure of it, because drawing attention to pleasure is considered undignified in this house. Breakfast is 15 minutes. You eat all of it because you have learned not to waste food and because you're hungry, and because you don't know what today will require. You don't always know what today will require. The schedule of the okiya has a shape, a general pattern of practice and preparation and performance, but the specific contents shift according to what the okasan decides, and the okasan decides based on information that flows through this house like water, through the canal outside, through channels you can't always see. You're almost never the last to know things. You're almost always not the first. 8 o'clock. Dance practice. The dance teacher does not live in the okiya. She comes from outside, from her own studio 2 streets over, and she arrives at 8 in the morning and teaches until noon, and then leaves again. And in the 4 years she has been coming to this house, she has spoken to you maybe 40 times directly. Each instance either a correction or an instruction, never anything that could be called conversation. Her name is Yanagi-sensei, willow teacher, and she is small and finely made, perhaps 50 years old, with hair that is always impeccable, and posture that is essentially architectural. She wears indigo kimono almost exclusively. Different indigo kimono, a range that goes from the blue of deep water to the blue of noon sky, and they are always perfectly coordinated with the obi that binds them. And she moves in them with the quality of someone who has spent 40 years making sure their clothing is invisible, who has so fully mastered the art of wearing a kimono that the kimono simply becomes an extension of the body rather than a thing being worn. You're afraid of Yanagi-sensei in a way that is different from how you're afraid of the okasan. The okasan holds your debt and your future. Yanagi-sensei holds your body. When she looks at you during practice, she sees things that are invisible to everyone else, can see the slightest symmetry in your hip placement, can see the tension in your jaw that's affecting your neck, that's affecting your shoulder, that's affecting the way your left arm moves, can see the microsecond of hesitation before the pivot turn in the 3rd movement of the piece you've been working on for a month, which is a hesitation that has nothing to do with uncertainty about the choreography and everything, to do with a feeling you can't name. A kind of shrinking that happens in your chest when you get close to the part of the dance that requires you to look directly at the imaginary person you're supposed to be addressing. Nihon Buyo, Japanese classical dance. It is not what you might imagine when you think of dance. Is not movement for the sake of movement, not bodies in space expressing energy. It is the opposite. It is restraint expressing everything. It is the idea that the most powerful gesture is the one that almost doesn't happen. A good Nihon Buyo performance can contain more emotional weight in the angle of a hand than an entire opera contains in 2 hours of singing, or so you've been told, and you're starting to believe it because you've been doing the same movements for a month, and you still can't make them mean what they're supposed to mean. The piece is a scene from a classical play. You play a young woman watching someone she loves leave. That's essentially the entire action. Watching. Standing still and watching. The art is in what your face does and what your hands do, and what the slight lean of your body toward the direction he's walking says about the gravity of that moment, the pull of it. Yanagi-sensei looks at your lean and says, with no particular emphasis, as though reporting a weather condition, "You're apologizing. You don't know what she means. You're leaning toward him, but at the same time you're pulling away. Your chest is turning toward him and your shoulders are turning away. It's not grief. It's embarrassment." She's right. You can feel it immediately when she names it. The way you sometimes can't locate a smell until someone tells you what it is, and then it's suddenly overwhelming. You're embarrassed, and you are performing longing in front of a teacher who has been watching girls perform longing for 30 years and can see every place where the real thing leaks through the performance and every place where there's nothing real at all, just technique covering absence. "Again," she says. You go again. From the beginning of the passage, 8 counts in, you reach the lean, and you feel yourself trying to mean it, trying to put something real into the angle of the spine, and the trying is visible, which is worse than the embarrassment was. Stop. She stands up. She is, as mentioned, small, but when she stands up in a room it feels differently. She comes to stand beside you, not touching, but close enough that you can smell her, which is cedar and something floral, camellia maybe, and something else underneath that is harder to name. Possibly just the smell of someone who's been completely themselves for a long time. "You're not watching him leave," she says. "You're watching yourself watch him leave. You're performing grief instead of being the woman who is standing here watching someone she loves disappear around a corner." A pause. She looks at you in a way that goes somewhere most people's looks don't reach. Have you ever watched someone leave that you didn't want to leave? You think of your mother, the morning they put you in the cart, your mother's face at the edge of the road as the cart moved away getting smaller, and the quality of the air between you changing as the distance grew, becoming something more solid than air, becoming something you'd need to cross if you ever went back. You don't say this. You don't say anything. But something must show on your face, because Yanagi-sensei nods, once, slightly. "That," she says. "Do that." She returns to her position, and you go again. And the lean, this time, is different. Not better in any technical sense. The angle is the same, the feet are in the same position, the hands are doing the same thing, but something in the chest is different. Something has opened slightly, the way a door opens when you stop trying to force it and instead just turn the handle. Yanagi-sensei watches, says nothing, which is the closest she gets to approval. Older sister, watching from the side of the room where she's working on a different section of her own piece, looks at you for a moment. You catch it. Her face is, as always, carefully composed, but there is something behind the composure, some small acknowledgement, a quality of attention that is different from the general attention she pays to the room. You file this away. You don't know yet what to do with it, but you file it. The dance practice lasts until 11. The last hour of it is footwork drills, which is the part that doesn't appear in any woodblock print, and which is the part that explains why Yanagi-sensei's feet, when you've caught a glimpse of them in the dressing room, look the way they do. Repeated small movements, over and over, the precise placement of the foot at specific angles and distances, the training of the weight distribution so that when you move across a stage, the movement looks like gliding rather than walking. It's achieved through the repetition of small steps that load the ankles and the Achilles tendons in particular ways, and after an hour of it, your ankles are warm and your calves are alive with a low-level burn, and the balls of your feet are tender in the spots where they've repeatedly taken weight at angles they weren't designed for. You don't limp. Even in private, here at practice, you don't limp. Limping draws attention to the difficulty, and the difficulty is not supposed to be visible. You put your weight evenly. You complete the session. You bow to Yanagi-sensei as she leaves, watching her cross the garden with the same quality of movement she has everywhere, that complete integration of awareness and body. And you think, not for the first time, that's what it looks like. That's what I'm working toward. And you calculate the distance between where she is and where you are. And the calculation takes approximately 1 second and produces a number that is very large and a feeling that is very small. Noon. There is a break in the schedule, which is not really a break but a different category of obligation. After lunch, which is also rice, with a piece of grilled fish today and a small dish of simmered vegetables that Tomo makes with a patience that borders on philosophy. The afternoon belongs to what the Okasan calls jiyujikan, free time, though the word free is doing enormous work in that phrase. It is time that is not formally scheduled. It is time that is not directly supervised. It is not, however, time during which you're expected to be idle, because idleness in this house is a kind of visible insult to the discipline that everything else requires. Free time, in practice, means something different for each member of the house. Older sister uses it to read, which she does with the same focused attention she brings to everything, sitting by the garden window with whatever she's borrowed from the lending library that operates 2 streets away, a system where you pay a small deposit and take a book for as long as you need. A system that means books move through the city like water, passing from household to household, carrying with them the traces of everyone who held them, slight oil marks, folded corners, the very occasional annotation in the margins in handwriting that tells you something about the person who made it. You use it for different things on different days. Today, because the morning was hard and the dance lesson went to a place you didn't expect, you go to the back garden. The garden at the back of the okiya is the kind of garden that doesn't try to be grand. 3 meters by 4 perhaps, with the pine tree the okasan prunes, and the 3 stones you've been looking at for 2 years, and a small stone basin called a tsukubai that holds water for ritual hand-washing before the tea ceremony room that's just beyond the garden. In winter the tsukubai freezes by morning and thaws by midday, and right now the ice is in its melting phase, the surface of the water showing the movement of liquid underneath, while a thin crust of ice at the edges makes a sound like tissue paper when the wind touches it. You sit on the edge of the veranda, not properly, not formally, just sit, your legs hanging off the edge rather than folded under you, which is technically undignified, and which you only allow yourself when you're fairly sure no one can see directly from the main house. The planks of the veranda are cold through your kimono. The garden smells of pine resin and cold air, and the particular mineral smell of frozen then thawing stone. The noise of the city is present here. It's always present, which is one of the things you've adjusted to, the way Edo is never entirely quiet, even in the quietest corners of it. The canal traffic has started, small boats passing with loads you can hear but not see, the wooden creak of the hull against the water, the occasional instruction called from one boatman to another. Somewhere 2 streets over, a merchant shop is conducting its morning business. The familiar sound texture of commerce, voices negotiating and the specific wooden percussion of goods being moved and stacked. A dog, somewhere. Closer, a temple bell, the second pulse of the noon signal, the resonance still hanging in air above the city like something that can't quite decide to leave. You think about what Yanagi-sensei said, the difference between performing grief and being the woman who is actually grieving. And you think about the cart pulling away from the road in front of your mother's house. And you think about the face she made, and you think that whatever you were doing in the dance just before that moment, whatever technique you were deploying, it was a mask over something that was actually there, and all you had to do was remove the mask. Which raises a question you haven't figured out yet, which is, if removing the mask is what makes the performance real, what is the mask for in the rest of life? Why do you build it at all? Why does every woman in this house move through the day behind a face they've constructed, a face they put on with the white paint and took off when the makeup came off, if the real thing is more powerful? You don't have an answer. You suspect the answer is complicated in the way that answers to questions about survival tend to be complicated. The pine tree makes a small sound in the wind. The ice at the edge of the basin cracks faintly. The temple bell makes its second resonance in the air. You sit until the cold of the veranda has moved from noticeable to insistent, and then you go back inside. In the afternoon, after the free period, comes what you privately think of as the small educations. These are the lessons that don't have specific class times but happen throughout the day as opportunity presents, which is to say as the okiya-san or older sister find openings to teach you things that fall outside the formal curriculum of shamisen and dance and tea ceremony. Things like how to walk in a full formal kimono without taking steps that are too wide, how to pour sake in a way that's simultaneously accurate and beautiful, the slight tilt of the tokuri bottle, the way you stop before the cup is quite full, how to listen to a conversation without appearing to be listening, how to hold the awareness of everything in a room while appearing to be focused on one thing, how to exit a room, which is more complex than entering because leaving is where most people's discipline fails, because leaving feels like it's over, because the performance always extends through the last bow and the slide of the door, and the sound of your footsteps retreating down the corridor. You're learning the art of the retreating footstep. Today the okiya-san herself appears in the afternoon, which is not unusual but is not common enough to be taken for granted. She moves through the main room to where you and Haruko are working. You on your shamisen passage and Haruko on her calligraphy, which is a practice that all the women of the house do, and which produces its own particular physical sensations. The weight of the brush loaded with ink, the way the paper resists and then yields, the smell of ink being ground on the stone, which is one of the oldest smells in this country, which connects you to everyone who has ever sat at a writing desk in Japan going back more than 1,000 years. The okiya-san sits. She watches you play. You keep playing because stopping without instruction would be wrong. She says after a moment, "The attack on the third string." You play the phrase again. Softer. The third string should feel like asking permission. This is how the okiya-san teaches when she teaches directly, in metaphors that are either very useful or not useful at all, depending on your state of mind. Permission. What does that mean for a string instrument? But you think about it. You let the idea of permission work on your hand, and the bachi relaxes slightly, and the sound changes in a way you can hear immediately, a quality of invitation rather than statement. The okiya-san watches. Better. Again. You play the phrase 6 more times, each time slightly closer. The okiya-san listens with her eyes slightly closed, which is either concentration or fatigue, and you've never been able to tell which. Then she opens her eyes and looks at you properly. Not at your hands, not at the instrument, at you. "You were upset at practice this morning," she says. It isn't a question. You don't know how she knows this. She wasn't in the room. Yanagi-sensei's lesson was difficult, you say, which is both the truth and almost nothing. It will continue to be difficult. She doesn't say this unkindly. She says it the way you'd tell someone that winter continues to be cold, as a condition of reality that requires no sympathy because sympathy wouldn't change it. Yanagi-sensei is trying to reach something in you that requires difficulty to reach. She stands, and before she leaves, she does something unexpected. She turns back to you and says, in a voice that is slightly different from her usual voice, slightly less composed, slightly more personal. When I was your age, I cried during dance practice every morning for 3 months. Yanagi-sensei's teacher told me I was producing sound but not music. Every morning, same words. You look at her. The face that barely moves is showing something small and real. What changed, you ask? I stopped trying to not cry, she says. I just cried and kept dancing. She leaves. Haruko is looking at you from across the room. You make no expression. But something in your chest has moved. Some furniture rearranged slightly without anyone asking permission. The afternoon passes. 3 o'clock brings tea ceremony practice, which is its own entire world and which requires its own kind of attention. Chado, the way of tea. The specific movements for folding the fukusa cloth, for cleaning the utensils, for scooping the matcha powder, for whisking the bowl. Each movement prescribed, each movement with a name and a sequence and a reason that goes back 400 years to a tea master named Sen no Rikyu, who decided that making and drinking tea was the concentrated expression of every virtue worth having: harmony, respect, purity, tranquility. Wa, kei, sei, jaku. Not as abstract ideals, but as physical practices, things you do with your hands and your body, principles made material. The tea room is 4.5 tatami, which is the traditional size, the smallest space that still has room for 2 people and the ceremony between them. The low door, the nijiri-guchi, is a thing you have to crouch to enter, which means that everyone who enters, regardless of rank or wealth, arrives in a posture of humility. Sien no Rikyu designed this deliberately. The lord and the peasant both must bow. The matcha you use in practice is not the expensive kind. The expensive kind, the kind you use when a guest is actually present, has a colour that is genuinely difficult to describe, a green so vivid it almost seems lit from inside, and a smell that is complex in the way of things that have been grown and dried and ground with extraordinary attention. The practice matcha is paler, earthier, still good, but not the same. The bowl you use is a practice bowl, slightly chipped at the rim, heavier than it looks, a thing that has been in this tea room for probably 30 years and has been held by every pair of hands that learned the tea ceremony in this house. The texture of the bowl is something you know extremely well by now. The glaze, which is dark green and irregularly applied, the way classical Japanese glazes often are, intentionally irregular, the imperfection considered part of the beauty, a quality called wabi, which means something like the beauty that comes from incompleteness, from things that don't quite finish, from the awareness of transience. The rim has a slight roughness to it from the chip, and when you drink from a practice bowl, you always touch this roughness with your fingers first. Orient yourself to the floor before you drink. You've done this every afternoon for 2 years, and you still do it without thinking about it, this small acknowledgement of the bowl's damage. Your tea teacher today is older sister, which means the teacher-student relationship between you runs in a different direction than it does during shamisen, and this creates a specific texture to the afternoon. Older sister is a fully initiated geisha who's been practicing the tea ceremony for 6 years and has a quality of presence in the tea room that is different from anywhere else. A stillness that doesn't feel like suppression but like accumulation. Like all the noise of the rest of her day has settled to the bottom, and what's left on the surface is clear. She watches you fold the fukusa cloth. The fold requires a specific sequence of movements, the hands moving through 9 distinct steps, and by now you can do it without counting, but the result isn't always the same. Today the fold is slightly uneven, the corners not meeting precisely, and older sister reaches across and unfolds it and hands it back to you. You fold it again, this time slightly better. She nods. The tea ceremony, when it proceeds well, has a quality that's hard to account for. It is extremely slow, deliberately slow, the slowness being part of the point. The idea being that you move at the pace of the process rather than trying to move the process at your pace, that you follow the rhythm rather than impose one. When you're in the right relationship with it, when the rushing part of you is quieted enough to actually be in the tea room rather than everywhere else simultaneously, there's a quality of time in the tea room that's different from the quality of time outside it. Things are complete in themselves. The sound of the water in the iron kettle, a specific low hissing sound the Japanese call matsukaze, pine wind, is fully the sound of the water and nothing else. The smell of the charcoal, the slight weight of the whisk in the palm of the hand, bamboo split into 100 thin tines, the dry rustle of it. You're not always in the right relationship with it. Today you are almost there, which is better than yesterday and not as good as 2 days ago when something clicked and the whole ceremony moved through you rather than being moved by you. But you can feel the direction. Older sister pours the hot water. The bowl is ready. You drink. The matcha is bitter and rich and slightly astringent in the way that makes the roof of your mouth tighten. You hold the bowl with both hands, turn it 3 times clockwise as you've been taught, drink in 3.5 sips, set it down, admire it, which means actually looking at it, looking at the shape of the bowl and the quality of the glaze, looking at the thing you've just participated with as if it has its own importance, because it does. Older sister watches all of this. After a moment she says, "Better." From older sister, this is a significant endorsement. You keep your face neutral. Inside, the small machinery of encouragement does its small work. 5 o'clock. The afternoon light through the garden is changing, going orange-gold as it tends to in late autumn when the sun angle drops and everything is briefly and incredibly beautiful before it goes dark. The pine tree in the garden catches this light in a particular way, the needles going from green to something almost bronze, and the 3 stones cast shadows across the raked gravel beneath them that are long and thin and precise as calligraphy. This is the time of day you like best in the garden. You've been trying to understand why, and the closest you've gotten is that it's the only part of the day when the light is doing something undeniable, something that doesn't require interpretation or practice or the right technique. The light just does it, whether you're watching or not. But you can't stay in the garden because now is when the evening preparation begins, and the evening preparation is its own long, technical, physically demanding process that takes until the guests arrive, which is usually 8 o'clock, sometimes 7, sometimes 9, depending on the evening. The preparation begins with the bath. The bathhouse attached to the okiya is not large, not luxurious in the way that the great public bathhouses of Edo are luxurious, those famous establishments where half the city seems to gather in the evenings to soak and gossip and conduct the social business of the day. This is a practical bath, a hinoki cypress tub deep enough to sit in up to the shoulders, heated by a fire in a separate compartment in the base, and it smells enormously of the wood itself, which is one of the finest smells in Japan. A clean, resinous, warm smell that has none of the heaviness of pine or cedar, a smell that opens rather than closes. You bathe with the efficiency of someone who has learned to complete this process within a specific time. Wash the hair, which is long and which takes time because the oil used to style it has to come out completely before it can go back in. The oil is camellia oil from the seeds of the tsubaki tree, which is used across Japan for skin and hair in the way that simpler oils are used elsewhere, and it has a particular feel to it, lighter than sesame oil, not quite as greasy as it sounds, with a very faint floral smell. Getting it out of hair that's been styled since this morning requires 3 applications of washing powder and a significant amount of handwork on the scalp, pulling the fingers through from root to end. The familiar resistance of long, wet hair under the fingers. The sensation of washing your own hair is one of the remaining private pleasures of the day. Nobody watches this. Nobody supervises the quality of the shampooing. This is just your hands and your head, and the hot water and the smell of the cypress. And for the 20 minutes it takes to wash, dry, and begin to comb out the tangles, you are in a space that belongs entirely to the physical. Just sensation, just the warmth and the texture and the smell. You don't waste it. After the bath comes the skin care, which is its own discipline. The white makeup the geisha and maiko wear in performance is applied over a foundation of camellia oil, and removing it every evening requires thoroughness, because the white pigment, which is made from ground white lead, in the older tradition, though the house now uses a rice powder preparation that is somewhat less likely to destroy your skin over time, sits in the pores if you don't clean completely. The older women of the flower districts who didn't have access to the newer preparations show the effects in their 40s, a texture to the skin around the jaw and forehead that speaks of years of chemical accumulation. Okasan knows this. She supplies the younger women in her house with the better preparation. You use a cloth soaked in warm water with a small amount of oil, and you work in circles from the centre of the face outward, the white coming off in pale smears on the cloth. There is something slightly disturbing and slightly satisfying about this process. The revelation of the face underneath the performance face. The skin that appears is reddish with the heat of the bath and slightly blotchy at the cheeks. Actual skin rather than the porcelain surface the makeup creates, with the small irregularity of texture that real skin has and that the white face erases. This is the face you have between performances, the one with the pores showing and the slight darkness under the eyes from the early mornings, and the faint asymmetry of the brow line that the professional makeup corrects. The face that exists when nobody is paying. You look at it in the small mirror in the dressing room. The light is from an oil lamp at this hour, which is a warm light that makes everything slightly more golden and slightly less precise than daylight. You look at the face, not critically, not approvingly, just look. This is something the Okasan advised in the early days of your training, this looking without judgment, because the relationship you have with your own face is going to matter enormously in a profession where the face is significant, and the judgment of others about the face is constant, and the ability to remain in a neutral relationship with your own face is a survival skill. Haruko appears in the doorway. She looks exhausted, which she should, and her hair is still damp from the bath, which means she's going to have trouble with the styling tonight. The Okasan says the guests tonight include Yamamoto-san, she says. You absorb this. Yamamoto-san is a regular patron of the house, a merchant in the high-quality lacquerware trade who comes perhaps twice a month and who's been coming for 6 years. He is not an easy guest, not in the way that some of the older, more relaxed patrons are easy. the ones who come to drink sake and hear music and don't require the full expenditure of attention. Yamamoto-san is attentive in a way that requires you to be completely present, asks questions that need real answers, notices everything. Has he specified a particular program, you ask? Older sister is playing, you'll be serving. Serving rather than performing. This is the role you occupy at most of the formal evening still, the background function, the pouring and the moving and the knowing when to appear and knowing when to vanish, which is its own skill and in some ways a harder one than the performing, because during performance you know what to do, and during service you have to read the room continuously and respond to it. All right, you say. You begin the process of putting the face back on. The white foundation goes on first, mixed to the right consistency, which is not quite paste and not quite liquid, applied with a flat brush in upward strokes from the neck, then the face, covering everything to a uniform opacity. There is a line at the neck, a thin strip of skin left bare or left in a shaped point at the nape, which is one of the most discussed and painted features of the geisha aesthetic. This narrow remaining triangle of actual skin at the back of the neck below the pinned hair, considered one of the most central details precisely because of what it reveals by revealing so little. 2 lines of white are left at the nape, revealing the skin in between. It takes you longer to get this right than almost any other part of the makeup. The precise placement of the lines requiring both a steady hand and a good mirror, which the dressing room has but which is positioned in a way that requires you to hold your own small hand mirror to see the back of your neck, which means 4 hands involved in one neck, which is more complicated than it sounds. The eyes. A thin line of black at the upper lid, extending slightly at the outer corner, creating an upward tilt that is both artificial and, once learned, more expressive than any unassisted eye shape you might have. The lower lash line, a softer application of the same black, creating depth without drama. You're still a Maiko, still in the apprentice years, and so the colour applied to the eyes and the lips is different from the full geisha's palette. Red at the inside corners of the eyes rather than the outside, pink red at the lips rather than the deep crimson. The palette calibrated to read as younger, less certain, the beauty of something still becoming rather than fully arrived. This calibration is not something you chose, it was chosen for you. It is part of the grammar of this world, this visual language in which every detail communicates a social fact. The hair takes the longest. The hairstyle of a Maiko is specific, one of several styles associated with different stages of training and different periods of the year, and requires a framework of wax applied to the hair while it's warm, then shaped around a structure of padding, then pinned with the elaborate kanzashi hair ornaments that shift with the season. Because everything in this world shifts with the season. Because the acknowledgement of time passing and natural cycles is built into the aesthetic at every level. Tonight you're wearing the November version of your current formal style, and the kanzashi include a maple leaf in the autumn colours, beaten gold leaves the colour of the October light you saw in the garden. They catch the lamplight as you pin them, throwing small moving reflections on the dressing room wall. The kimono is last. This is the moment the evening becomes real. The kimono you wear on formal evenings is not yours. Technically it belongs to the house, though the debt you'll pay for it will be attributed to you. It is silk, obviously. Silk that has been dyed to a specific colour by a specific dyer in a specific neighbourhood of Kyoto, where the dyeing families have been practising their craft for generations, and the colour is a deep green that shifts toward teal in warm light and towards something almost black in shadow. And the pattern on it is chrysanthemums, the autumn flower. clusters of petals that have been worked into the silk by a method involving resist dyeing and embroidery that takes a skilled craftsperson several months to complete for a single garment. When you put it on, which is not a simple process which requires assistance, Tomo's assistance tonight, the cook helping you with the obi because older sister and the okasan are already dressing, the weight of it settles on your shoulders like a specific kind of gravity, 12 pounds approximately, including the obi and the multiple undergarments, which is not nothing, which is a weight you carry for the next 4 to 6 hours while maintaining the posture and the movement that 12 pounds of formal silk requires. The obi is the sash that wraps the middle, tied in an elaborate knot at the back, that for a maiko trails behind in a long loop called the dorari obi, the hanging obi, which sweeps the floor slightly at the back and gives the maiko silhouette its characteristic quality. When you walk, the obi moves slightly, a trailing weight that affects your balance and requires a specific kind of walking to manage. Small steps, feet turned slightly inward, weight shifted toward the balls of the feet, the whole body moving forward from a stable centre rather than the heel-to-toe gait of Western walking or the more relaxed walking you do in practice clothes when no one's watching. Tomo ties the obi knot. Her hands are certain and practiced. The kind of hands that have done this specific task so many times it has moved entirely into the body, requires no thought, just moves through the sequence of folds and wraps and tucks with the easy fluency of someone telling a story they know by heart. Still, Tomo says, not unkindly, because you shifted slightly when she pulled the obi tight across the ribs, you become still. The constriction of the obi is another thing you've adjusted to, a compression across the lower ribs and upper abdomen that affects your breathing in a way you notice most when you're trying to sing or play, because those activities require breath that the obi is partially blocking. You've learned to breathe higher into the upper chest, which changes the quality of your voice slightly, but is better than the alternative, which is loosening the obi in the middle of an evening, which is not done. There, Tomo says, you look in the mirror. The person in the mirror is not entirely you. This is one of the stranger phenomena of the transformation, which you first noticed about a month into your training, this sense of double occupancy. There is you, inside the kimono and the makeup, feeling the cold of the dressing room floor through your tabi socks, and aware of the slight tension in your left shoulder from this morning's dance practice, and slightly hungry because dinner was small tonight. And there is the person in the mirror, who is composed and formal and beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with any individual characteristic, and everything to do with the accumulation of centuries of deliberate aesthetic development. The person in the mirror is a walking piece of cultural production. The person inside the mirror is a 15-year-old girl from Kazuke province who hasn't had enough to eat today. Both of these things are completely real. You pick up the small bag that holds the items you need for the evening, which is not much. A small cloth for your hands, a container of the lip colour for reapplication, a tiny purse with almost nothing in it because you don't carry money in the evenings. It all passes through the house accounts. The bag is small enough to hold in one hand, silk, deep red, with a pattern of plum blossoms. Someone made it. Someone's hands wove that silk and dyed it and sewed the seams. You don't know whose hands. This is true of most of the things that surround you. You go into the main room to wait. The main room of the okiya is at the front of the house, the room that faces the street, with the sliding paper screens that in the evenings glow from the lanterns inside and in the very early morning are dark and opaque. It is a beautiful room. The Okasan has spent years and considerable money making it beautiful. The kind of beauty that Japanese aesthetic sensibility prizes. Understated, precise, pointing toward emptiness rather than filling it. A hanging scroll in the tokonoma that has been changed to a winter piece now. A brushwork pine branch heavy with snow, executed in 3 strokes and a suggestion, the painter knowing exactly when to stop. A Vasinceladon ceramic with a single spray of winter camellia. The low lacquered table reflecting the lamplight in its surface, the lacquer so deep and dark it looks like water rather than wood. Older sister is already here, also dressed. Her kimono a dark plum, her face perfectly made, her hair impeccable. She is sitting with the particular quality of waiting that you've been studying, waiting without apparent waiting, present without performing presence. She doesn't look at you when you enter. She doesn't need to. The Okasan arrives last, as always. She is dressed in the more subdued colours appropriate for a house mother, a deep charcoal with a subtle pattern, her hair up but simply, her face with the kind of minimal makeup that mature women wear in this world, which is mostly about the eyes and the precision of the hair rather than the white foundation. She looks at you both with the assessing look that registers everything and shows nothing, and then says, "The first guests arrive at 8. Yamamoto-san will be in the main room, the others in the side room. Fumiko, you'll play at 8:30. Yukio, you'll serve the main room." She pauses. Remember that Yamamoto-san will ask about the autumn festivals. He always does in November. He's interested in the Torinoichi because his family has a stall at the Utori Shrine Market. This is the kind of specific, practical intelligence the Okasan distributes before evenings. She's been managing this house for 15 years. She knows her guests the way you know the creaking boards in the corridor, which places hold and which places give. 8 o'clock. The first thing you hear is the sound of the guests' sandals being removed in the entrance hall, the particular wooden clatter, and the murmur of greeting from the house girl whose job is to receive them. Then the sound of feet on the corridor, lighter in tabi socks, the specific sound of people moving through a house with the careful quality that guests bring to private spaces. Then voices. You're standing in position at the edge of the main room when the screen slides open. Yamamoto-san is 53 years old, a stocky man with a face that has had time to find its settled expression, which is something between concentration and satisfaction. He's wearing a formal dark kimono, not elaborate, but the quality is visible if you know what to look at, which you do, and the obi is silk in a pattern that his family probably uses for the lacquerware patterns, geometric, precise. He's accompanied tonight by a younger man you haven't seen before, perhaps 30, with the watchful quality of someone who is here to observe. "Ah," Yamamoto-san says, seeing you. "The young one." He says this comfortably, without condescension, or at least with the kind of condescension that comes from genuine affection for the category, rather than disrespect for the individual. He settles himself on the cushion at the head of the table. His companion sits to the side. You bow. Deep, precise. The hands in position, the spine straight. The whole thing held for the specific count before you straighten. Then you move to pour the first sake. This is what nobody pays you for. This is what the evening hours contain, the hours of the afternoon practice and the morning training. Nobody sees the girl who was on the floor at 4 a.m. with the cold coming up through the boards. Nobody is paying for the dance lesson that went somewhere unexpected and left something open in your chest that hasn't quite closed. Nobody sees the hunger or the tired feet or the ache in the shoulder from this morning's shamisen. What they see is this: a young woman in an autumn-coloured kimono moving across the room with steps so small they barely qualify as walking, pouring sake into a cup with both hands, the slight incline of the head, the quality of being entirely here, entirely available, entirely focused on the single action of pouring this particular cup. The sake flows from the tokuri. You stop before the cup is full. Yamamoto-san watches this with appreciation, which is not about the sake, it's about the everything else, the precision, the stillness at the centre. The thing you've been building with 4 a.m. floors and cold water and kneeling until your feet stop working and Yanagi-sensei saying stop, you're thinking about it. He picks up the cup. He drinks. He says to his companion, not to you. They train them very well here. You pour for the companion. Your face is neutral. Your face is composed. Your face is doing its job. Inside, in the space that nobody is paying for, you're doing arithmetic. You're calculating the distance between Yamamoto-san's approval and the debt attached to your name, and you are calculating the number of evenings like this one required to close that distance, and you are deciding, not for the first time, that the calculation is not impossible even if it is long, and you are choosing to find something like a foothold in the not impossible. The evening progresses. Older sister comes in at 8:30 and sits at the shamisen, and the first notes of the nagauta piece fill the room, and you listen to her play from your position at the edge of the room, and you hear something in her attack that you've been working on all morning. The quality of asking permission from the string rather than telling it what to do. And it sounds like this, like what you've been trying to find, and you understand it now in a way that the practice didn't quite show you. You file this away. You pour sake. You answer Yamamoto-san's question about the Tori no Ichi festival with the specific information that Oka-san gave you, and he leans forward slightly with the interest of someone who's recognized that you actually know what you're talking about. And the conversation that follows is real in a way that the evening doesn't always achieve. The younger companion watches you during this conversation, not rudely, not obviously, but watching. You're aware of it the way you're aware of all the watching that happens in this room, which is how you stay functional in here, by maintaining the full map of everyone's attention and positioning yourself within it. You refill the cup. The sake is warm. The room smells of charcoal from the hibachi in the corner, and the incense the Oka-san always burns, which is a blend that takes a trained nose to identify. Sandalwood and something sweeter, benzoin perhaps, a warm smell that lies underneath everything else the way the canal lies underneath the city. Midnight. The guests leave. You hear the sandals again, the murmured farewells, the particular sound of an evening successfully completed, the quality of satisfaction in departing voices that you're learning to read as reliably as weather. Yamamoto-san pauses in the entryway to say something to the Oka-san, something you don't hear, and then he's gone, and the house settles back into itself. You clean the main room, collect the cups, remove the ashtrays, return the sack things to their places. Haruko helps, moving quietly, both of you working in the efficient, wordless way you've developed for these tasks. The hired girl carries the larger things. The house returns to its baseline condition. The Oka-san appears in the doorway. She watches you working for a moment. Yamamoto-san was pleased, she says. He'll be back next week. She leaves. You continue cleaning. It's past midnight now. The city outside has thinned. The canal traffic down to almost nothing. The street sounds reduced to the occasional watchman, the distant music from other establishments along the water. The cold is coming up through the floor again the way it always does this time of night, finding the gaps between the boards, finding the spaces in the foundation. You finish the cleaning and go to remove the makeup. The cloth against the face again, the white coming off in slow smears, the face underneath appearing, the chrysanthemums coming out of the obi with Tomo's help, the weight of the evening settling. Your feet hurt, your shoulders hurt, your knees hurt. This is the inventory of the day, taken every night before sleep, the accounting of what the day cost. It cost a lot. It always costs a lot. And it produced something which you can feel but not name yet, some small accumulation towards something that isn't visible yet, the way savings accumulate before they become enough to spend. You're 15 years old. You have 8 years of debt and a long road of practice, and a voice that the Oka-san told older sister about in front of you, and a dance teacher who's trying to reach something in you that requires difficulty to reach, and a pine tree in a garden that catches the autumn light. That's what you have. That's tonight's accounting. You go upstairs. The attic room is cold, the futon already laid out. Haruko's breathing already slow and steady from her side of the mattress. You kneel to fold the small contents of your bag back into their places. The lip colour, the cloth, the little red silk purse. The city makes its midnight sounds. Somewhere across the canal someone is playing a shamisen. Not a professional playing, just someone at home, probably slightly drunk, picking out a familiar melody with the slow, exploratory quality of someone following the sound wherever it wants to go. You listen to it for a moment. Then you lie down. Your feet touch the futon and the cold of the bed meets you, and gradually your body warms the space around it. And the warmth is gradual and complete, and arrives as a relief that goes all the way in. Tomorrow, 4 a.m, the same bells, the same floor with the same cold coming up through it, but also the pine tree in the November light, the matcha bowl with its chipped rim, the way the shamisen sounded when older sister played it at 8:30 and you heard, for the first time clearly, the thing you've been working toward. These things are also real. The shamisen from across the canal makes a mistake, hesitates, then finds its way back to the melody. Not older sister's quality, not anyone's quality. Just a sound in the night, someone's hands finding their way through the dark. You close your eyes. The days in the okiya don't stack the way ordinary days stack. They don't accumulate like coins in a jar, discrete and countable. They accumulate more the way water accumulates in stone, slowly, invisibly, and then one morning you look at the stone and there's a hollow in it where there wasn't one before, and you can't point to the moment when it happened because it happened in the space between moments. 3 weeks after the evening with Yamamoto-san, something shifts in the dance practice. It doesn't announce itself. There's no particular morning when you arrive at the teaching room and feel different about what you're doing. It's more subtle than that. You're working through the third movement of the piece, the one that contains the lean, and Yanagi-sensei is sitting across from you with a complete stillness that is her particular form of attention. And you reach the moment, the watching moment, and you do the lean. And Yanagi-sensei is quiet. 30 seconds pass. You hold the ending position. Again, she says, you do it again, more quiet. Then she says, not in the tone she uses for corrections, in a tone that has slightly different air in it. Do you feel the difference? You do. You've been feeling it for the last few days, but didn't trust it enough to name it. The difference is in the weight. There's a quality of actual weight in the movement now, as though grief has mass, as though wanting someone to stay pulls at the body the way gravity pulls at everything else. Yes, you say. Yanagi-sensei looks at you for a moment longer than she usually does. Then she nods once, slowly, which is different from the quick nod she uses for simple corrections. This is the nod that means something has been accomplished. She moves on to the next passage. You store this moment the way you store the chipped rim of the tea bowl, as a small, certain thing in a life that is mostly uncertain. You felt the difference. She confirmed it. This happened. Outside the teaching room window, the December cold has arrived in full, and the garden is a different thing now. The pine tree holds its shape, but everything else has either died back or changed. The 3 stones dusted with frost on the mornings after clear nights. The sukubai is frozen solid until midday, a perfect disc of ice in the basin that you've started touching each morning as you pass, feeling the cold through your fingers like a greeting. The city beyond the okiya walls is also a different thing in December. You know this from the sounds and from the days when you go out, which are fewer now that the weather has closed in but which still happen, because you still have the errands that the house requires, still have the small expeditions that are part of life in the Hanamachi, and that nobody could fully remove from your schedule without also removing your knowledge of the world you're supposed to be serving. The Hanamachi, the flower district. You should understand what this place is, because it's easy to think you understand it from the outside and much harder to understand it from where you're standing, which is inside it and below it and learning its grammar one humiliation at a time. The Hanamachi is not the Yoshiwara. This distinction matters enormously to everyone inside it, and is invisible to most people outside it. The Yoshiwara is the licensed pleasure district, the walled city of courtesans northeast of Edo Castle, the place that the Tokugawa government officially permitted and controlled and taxed, the place that appears in so many of the woodblock prints you've seen, the oiran in their extraordinary elevated wooden sandals and their impossibly elaborate hair ornaments moving in the slow, formal procession that was both a display and a negotiation. The Yoshiwara is for a specific transaction, which is sex, licensed, priced, organized into a hierarchy of its own that goes from the highest rank of oiran down to workers so low in the system that they barely have names. That is not what you do. What you do, and this is the distinction that the Okasan will make with a precision that contains genuine feeling, is art. You are an artist. Your training is in music and dance and tea ceremony and conversation, and the specific social skill of making a room feel different, feel better, feel more itself by your presence in it. You do not sell sex. You sell an atmosphere. You sell the feeling of being in a room with someone who has mastered the art of being completely present. This distinction is real. It is also complicated, because the distinction is real in theory and messier in practice, as most things are, because the world the okiya exists in is the same world the Yoshiwara exists in, and the men who come to both places are sometimes the same men, and the money that sustains both is sometimes the same money, and the pressures that can shape what happens in a house like yours are pressures that the Okasan manages with the same care she brings to everything, constantly, exhaustingly, with a precision that you're only beginning to understand. But this morning, in December, before any of that context matters, you are going out. The Okasan has an errand that requires someone with good eyes and reliable judgment. She wants a specific tea bowl. Not just any tea bowl, but one from a particular craftsman in the Nihonbashi district, a man named Sato whose celadon work she's been buying for years, and she wants to see the new winter pieces, and she can't go herself because she has the accounts to do and a meeting with the suppliers of silk goods who come twice a year from Kyoto to show their new inventory. So she sends you. With Haruko, because you don't go out alone, which is a rule that has practical and social dimensions both, the practical being that two people are harder to take advantage of than one, the social being that a Maiko seen alone in the street has a different quality to her presence than a Maiko accompanied, and the appearance of being accompanied is its own form of information about what house you represent and how it manages its people. Haruko is delighted in a way she doesn't show on her face, but that is present in the quality of her movements this morning, a slight extra energy, the way she folded her morning practice more quickly than usual, the way she was already putting on her day clothes when you went to get dressed. She is 13, and she's been in the house for 8 months, and she doesn't go out often. The city for her is still enormous and slightly miraculous. You understand this. You are the same way. The day kimono is different from the evening kimono in every dimension that matters. Lighter, less elaborate. A pattern of scattered autumn leaves on an indigo ground that is beautiful but practically, wearably beautiful, not the formal weight of the evening transformation. The hair is simpler, more of a day arrangement, still done carefully but without the full commitment of pins and ornaments and wax that the evening demands. The face, for a daytime errand, carries a lighter version of the makeup, enough to identify you as belonging to this world, not enough to qualify as full performance. You and Haruko step out of the okiya and into the street. December, Edo, mid-morning. The cold is immediate and specific, the kind that comes from a clear sky with the sun out but low on the horizon. So the light is everywhere and the warmth is absent. Everything illuminated and nothing heated. Your breath makes a small cloud. Haruko's breath makes a slightly smaller cloud. The canal beside the house is grey-green in the winter light, its surface carrying a thin skin of cold that makes it look denser than summer water, more purposeful. The Hanamachi district in the morning is nothing like it is in the evening. In the evening it is lanterns and music and the particular quality of dressed-up social life. People moving between venues with the contained energy of a night that has possibilities. In the morning it is just a neighbourhood, functional and business-like, with the bakeries and the merchants and the women hanging, washing on lines between the buildings and the canal men passing with their loads. The tea houses are shut. The entertainment establishments have their shutters up. The famous lanterns that give this street its nighttime character hang dark and cold above the doors. But there are other women from the other houses. You see them as you walk, other Maiko and junior geisha doing their morning errands, recognizable by their kimono and their particular way of moving, the small-stepped, slightly formal walk that persists even on casual outings, because once you've trained your body to move a certain way, it doesn't stop when the audience does. You nod to two women from a house you know by reputation. They nod back. This is the currency of the Hanamachi morning, these small acknowledgements that map the social territory without requiring speech. Haruko is looking at everything. The shops, the canal, the bridge ahead where the Nihonbashi district begins. Her eyes are moving with the quality of someone cataloguing, filing things away. Stop staring, you say, not unkindly. Look at things without looking at them. She pulls her eyes in slightly. This is a harder skill than it sounds. The peripheral awareness. The way you maintain the full picture without making it obvious that you're maintaining it. I'm better, you say. You cross the bridge. Nihonbashi, the road bridge from which, by official decree of the Tokugawa shogunate, all distances in Japan are measured. The centre of a measurement system that covers the entire country, every road marked from here, every post town's distance from Edo, calculated from this specific point on this specific bridge. You are standing at the centre of the country's spatial logic. The bridge itself is not especially grand. Sturdy, yes, well maintained. The wooden planking replaced on a regular schedule because this bridge carries an extraordinary amount of weight in goods and people and cannot afford to fail. The stone piers in the river are solid in a way that speaks of serious engineering, put in by craftsmen who understood that this particular crossing mattered. The river here, the Nihonbashi River, is narrower than the Sumida, which is the main artery, but is part of the same canal system, and in the morning you can see the boats going under the bridge in both directions, loaded with the goods of the city's commerce, the rice and the fish and the timber and the ceramics and the 1,000 categories of things that a city of 1 million people requires. The fish market is here, or the edge of it is. The smell reaches you before the stalls do, the enormous complex smell of ocean life brought to land, fish and salt water, and the particular edge of something going slightly past its best in the cold air, and the voices of the fishermen and the buyers who've been here since before dawn conducting the primary transactions of the day. The noise is incredible. The layered shout of people who've been shouting over each other since 4 a.m, and have developed a volume that simply is what it is, like weather. Haruko's face does something involuntary. Her nose. You'll get used to it, you tell her. You say this a lot. You've noticed. It gets easier. You'll get used to it. The small reassurances that the experienced offer to the less experienced, which are sometimes true, and sometimes just things you say to fill the space where helplessness would otherwise show. But this one is true. The fish market smell becomes background after the first 100 encounters with it. The city teaches you to do this with all its extreme sensory facts, to metabolize them into normalcy until the only thing that still registers as smell is something new, something that breaks the pattern. Sato's ceramic studio is in a narrow lane off the main Nihonbashi street, tucked between a paper merchant and a maker of writing brushes, whose shop front has the dried bundles of animal hair hung on hooks outside, dozens of them in different sizes, looking at a certain angle like strange flowers. The smell here is wood and paper and glue and animal, a combination that is not unpleasant. A craftsman's smell, a smell of making. Sato's door is open despite the cold. This is common with craftsman shops where the work produces its own heat, where the kiln is going, or the forge is lit, or the craftsman is simply so absorbed in what they're doing that the temperature of the air around them is secondary information. You slide the door fully open and enter. The studio is one large room. One half of it is the workshop, where the wheel stands and the tools hang on wooden pegs above the work surface, and the clay smell is overwhelming in here, the cold making it more mineral, more raw, a smell that is as old as human making. The other half is the display, which is spare in the way of good Japanese display, a few pieces on individual stands, the space around them treated as a positive quality, the emptiness saying, "Look at this object, it's the only thing here worth looking at." Sato himself is a short man in his 60s with hands that are the most remarkable feature about him. The fingers wide and flattened at the tips from decades of working clay, the skin there permanently dry and slightly cracked, the nails short in a way that isn't a choice but a necessity. He is working when you enter, not at the wheel but at a lower table, trimming the foot of a bowl with a bamboo tool, the motion precise and economical. He doesn't look up. "From the Katsuragi house," you say, the formal identification, giving the house name first. He finishes the trim, sets down the tool, wipes his hands on the cloth at his belt. Then he looks up. His eyes go to you, then to Haruko, then back to you. He nods once. Winter pieces are over here. He leads you to the display half. 6 bowls, varying in size. The celadon glaze is present on all of them. That particular green that is one of the great achievements of East Asian ceramics. A green that's actually created by iron oxide in the glaze, firing in a reduction atmosphere in the kiln. A process that transforms chemistry into something that looks like it came directly from the seafloor. The colour isn't uniform across all 6. Some are warmer, tending toward the yellow-green of new growth. Some are cooler, the blue-green of deep water. One, the largest, has a quality of darkness in it. The glaze almost too deep, like looking into the bowl is looking into something that continues. You look at them. This is not a quick task. You're here to choose for the Okasan, and choosing for the Okasan requires understanding what she sees when she sees ceramics, which is related to but not the same as what you see. You've been studying this, watching which pieces she picks up at exhibitions and how she holds them, what aspects she discusses with guests, what the tea bowl in the ceremony room says about her aesthetic sensibility. You've been building a picture of her taste the way you build the picture of a room's social dynamics, through observation and inference. The bowl with the deep darkness in it. You pick it up. The weight is immediately interesting, heavier than it looks, which is often the sign of a dense, well-fired clay body. The base of the foot ring is dry and granular under your fingers, left unglazed in the traditional way, the raw clay showing the mineral quality of its origin. The inner surface of the bowl slopes in a way that is subtly irregular, not perfectly smooth, with a slight wobble that you feel more than see, the mark of the hand on the wheel, the trace of the maker in the thing made. You turn it toward the light from the door. The glaze shifts. The darkness in it moves slightly, becomes something you could almost describe as luminous in a subterranean way, like light seen through still water. This one, you say. Sato looks at you. He looks at the bowl. A slight quality of satisfaction crosses his face, which in his case means the corners of his mouth move almost imperceptibly. She'll be pleased with that one. What's the price? He names a figure. You note it. You're not here to negotiate, which is unusual in this city where virtually every transaction has a negotiation built in. But the Okasan and Sato have a long relationship, 15 years at minimum, and in long relationships of this kind the price is the price, because the relationship is worth more than the margin, and both parties understand this. And the understanding is itself a kind of trust that doesn't need to be stated. You wrap the bowl in the cloth you brought for the purpose. The cloth is soft, an old silk that has been repurposed for this, and as you wrap the bowl you notice that the cloth carries the same camellia oil smell that everything in the house carries. The bowl, once wrapped, is warm from your hands, and you hold it in both hands as you leave. Haruko has been standing near the door the whole time, which is correct, and which she knew to do without being told, which is a small positive development. She's been watching Sato's work area with the peripheral, not peripheral gaze you mentioned on the bridge. Outside, the cold takes the warmth of the studio immediately. You tuck the bowl against your body, inside the fold of the outer kimono, both to protect it and to keep it warm, because a sudden change in temperature after firing is one of the things that can crack ceramics, and the Ukesan ceramic objects are not cracked. "Can I ask you something?" Haruko says. You wait. "Why that one? There were 6 bowls. Why that one?" This is a good question. You think about it as you walk, because thinking while walking is one of the skills you're developing. the ability to maintain multiple streams of attention simultaneously, the shamisen playing while you track the room, the dance technique while you actually inhabit the emotion, the walking while you think. The depth, you say after a moment. Sato's best work always has depth. Not just visual depth, though that. Something about how it holds space. The Okasan's aesthetic is about things that hold more than they appear to contain. A room that has emptiness in it that's richer than fullness. A sound that has silence around it. That bowl, when it's on the table in the tea room, the person looking into it will feel something, not name it, just feel it. Haruko walks beside you, absorbing this. How do you know what she sees? She asks. I watch her, you say. I watch everyone. This is one of the fundamental skills of the okiya and one of the things nobody teaches you formally. It's not on the curriculum the way shamisen is on the curriculum. Nobody sits you down and says, learn to see exactly what other people see, build a model of their perception inside your own mind, use that model to anticipate what they want before they want it. But this is the skill. This is what the Okasan has at 41 that she didn't have at 15. This is what older sister has that Haruko doesn't yet. The accumulated library of observations, sorted and catalogued and made useful. You're 15. Your library's still small, but it's growing. The walk back from Nihonbashi takes you through the edge of the commercial district, through streets that in the morning are pure function, delivery carts and workmen and the smell of food being prepared in the stalls that line the major thoroughfare. The stalls are brazier lit in December, each one with its own small fire, and the combined effect is a kind of warmth that rises from the street itself, from all these small fires burning simultaneously, a heat that catches you at waist level and doesn't quite reach your face. You stop at one for hot amazake. It's a reasonable indulgence within the bounds of what the Okasan would consider acceptable on a cold morning. This sweet, slightly fermented rice drink that comes hot in a small ceramic cup and warms you from the first sip in a way that the mere absence of cold never does. You give one cup to Haruko, who holds it with both hands in a way that is pure and unperformed, a child holding something warm. The amazake has a sweetness that is underneath the heat rather than on top of it, and a slight graininess from the rice that didn't fully dissolve, and a depth that comes from the fermentation, which is only slight here, barely enough to register but present. An undertone that carries the faint suggestion of something more complex than sweetness. You drink it standing at the stall, both of you, the vendor watching without comment. A dog passes, 2 men with a cart of timber, a woman with a basket of root vegetables, the turnips and daikon visible above the rim, the white of the daikon startling in the grey December light. Haruko finishes her amazake and hands the cup back to the vendor. She looks at the street around her with the eyes of someone who has been indoors for most of the last 8 months. It's enormous, she says. Edo. Everything. The city. The houses. How many people live here? You think about what the Okasan said once, drawing on something she'd heard from one of her guests. A man who had something to do with the official census that the shogunate conducts periodically. Possibly 1 million, maybe more. Nobody's quite sure because counting people is harder than it sounds. Haruko absorbs this. 1 million people. Where they all go, you gesture at the street. Here, everywhere, the same place they always go. This is one of the things about a city of this size. The thing that doesn't fit in your head when you first arrive and slowly becomes the texture of reality, the sheer number of simultaneous lives. Right now, at this exact moment, in these streets, and the streets beyond them, and the neighborhoods that go on in all directions from where you're standing. There are people doing every possible thing. There are people practicing the tea ceremony, and people hauling night soil, and people dying of fever, and people being born, and people negotiating the price of timber, and people kneeling on cold floors playing the shamisen at 4 a.m, and people sleeping late, and people writing letters, and people watching fish in the canal, and people crying about things you'll never know about. All of it happening at once. All of it the city. You collect the bowl from inside your kimono and check that it's still intact and return it to its position against your body, and you walk back to the house. The afternoon, 2 days after the Nihonbashi errand, brings something that happens at irregular intervals in the okiya, and that carries a particular quality of tension. The visit of the okasan's older sister. The older sister's name is Hana, which is also your real name, a fact you're not supposed to know, but which Tomoe lets slip in the kitchen 3 months after your arrival. The older sister lives in a house in Asakusa, which is another part of the city, a different kind of neighborhood, more commercial, less refined, the area around the Sensoji temple where the city's popular culture is densest, where the kabuki theatres stand and the street food is most elaborate, and the energy is constant and slightly overwhelming. She arrives in a sedan chair, which means she has money. The chairs cost as much as a good meal for the privilege of being carried through the city streets by 2 men, at a pace slightly faster than comfortable walking. The chair is set down at the gate. She steps out. She's perhaps 50, though she looks both older and younger than that in different lights. She has the kind of beauty that doesn't depend on youth, a very Japanese kind of beauty, the kind built on bone structure and the refinement of expression, rather than the freshness of skin. Her kimono is expensive. Her manner is the manner of someone who's been a certain kind of person for so long that it requires no maintenance. She's also the person whose advice the okasan trusts above anyone else's. You know this because of the quality of the meetings, when they sit together in the main room with the screens closed and their voices low. There is a texture to the silence that surrounds those meetings, the rest of the house quieter, more careful, not because anyone told them to be quiet, but because the house feels differently when serious things are being discussed at its centre. Today, the okasan's sister stays for 3 hours. You serve tea twice, entering and exiting with the precision and invisibility that is required during these meetings. The conversation, in the fragments you can't help but hear, is about money, and about one of the other houses in the Hanamachi, and about a guest whose behaviour has apparently crossed a line that requires discussion. You don't know the details. You aren't supposed to. But you do know from older sister who told you once, matter-of-factly, the way she tells you things that are simply facts, that the business of an okiya is fragile in specific ways that don't apply to other businesses. It depends entirely on reputation, on the quality of the women, on the trust of the patrons, on the relationships with the other houses in the Hanamachi, which are simultaneously cooperative and competitive in a way that requires constant navigation, and on the ability of the okasan to manage all of these things simultaneously, while also managing the internal life of the house, which includes everything from the sourcing of the silk to the well-being of her apprentices to the relationship with the suppliers to the fees paid to the Hanamachi Association that oversees the standards of the district. The okasan carries all of this, every day, in addition to making sure that the shamisen practice starts at 4, that Haruko's calligraphy improves, that the tea bowl from Sato's studio is correct, that Yamamoto-san is pleased, that the evening is successful, that the morning accounts are accurate. You watch the okasan when you can do it without being observed. not critically, just watching, trying to see what she sees, trying to understand the full weight of what's being managed. Because this is also your education, even though nobody scheduled it, even though it's not in the curriculum, understanding the full architecture of the thing you're inside. The older sister leaves as the lamps are being lit. The Oka-san emerges from the main room and stands for a moment in the corridor. She looks, briefly, like someone who's been doing something very heavy for a long time. Not defeated, not broken, but carrying. Then she straightens and walks toward the kitchen to check on dinner. You step back from the doorway where you'd been passing. That carrying, that quality of it. You'll think about it for weeks. January arrives with the particular force of midwinter in Edo, when the cold is no longer the novelty of autumn, but has become simply the nature of the air, a given, a constant. The canal ices over in the mornings, the surface going from grey to white, and the boats that normally move along it from first light are held until midday, when the ice softens enough to break. The sound of boats breaking canal ice is a winter sound specific to this city, a percussive, irregular sound, both violent and useful. The New Year in Japan is unlike the New Year in most places. It is not primarily about celebration in the sense of parties and noise, though those happen. It is about purification and starting and the specific aesthetic of January, which is pine branches and white cloth, and the clean geometry of new rice cakes, and the smell of charcoal and the quiet that comes on the first few days when the city pauses briefly before returning to its business. The Hanamachi has its own version of the New Year rituals. The okiya is cleaned from top to bottom in the last days of December, a cleaning so thorough it has its own name and its own specific tasks, every surface wiped, every item removed from its place and replaced with intention. The scroll in the tokonoma changed to the New Year image, a crane and a pine tree, the symbols of longevity, the wish encoded in the aesthetic. You clean the teaching room on the last day of December. You and Haruko, together working methodically from ceiling to floor because the dust falls down. The tatami are taken outside and beaten, which in December is a commitment. Your arms tired after 10 minutes of the bamboo paddle against the tightly woven rush, the dust coming out in visible clouds that the cold air dissipates before they travel far. Then the tatami back in, the exact same positions, turned slightly to even the wear. The shamisen stands wiped with a dry cloth, because moisture will affect the skins. The scrollwork of the tokonoma alcove dusted with a special brush. Very fine, made for the purpose. You don't resent this work. You did in the early months, which you can admit to yourself now, the resentment of being asked to do the physical maintenance of a place where your status felt unclear. The sense that cleaning was beneath whatever you were supposed to be becoming. But the resentment went away somewhere in the second year, replaced by something that you'd call understanding if you were being generous and submission if you were being precise. The house is maintained by everyone who lives in it. The hierarchy of the house doesn't exempt anyone from its physical care. The Oka-san cleans her own room, older sister cleans her tools, you clean the teaching room and the corridor and sometimes the garden. Tomo keeps the kitchen. The hired girl does the heavy work. Everything here is maintained by the people inside it. This seems obvious when you say it. It's less obvious when you're actually doing it. When you're on your knees with a cloth on the third panel of the corridor at 8 a.m, New Year, January 2nd, the formal visit day. Geisha and Maiko from all the houses of the Hanamachi walk between the establishments, making courtesy calls, wearing the most formal kimonos of the year, moving in small groups through streets that are quiet with the specific quiet of a city whose commerce has paused for 2 days. The sky is clear and cold and very blue, the particular blue of January that is different from every other month's blue, a harder blue, a blue with no suggestion of warmth. You go with older sister and Haruko. The Okasan has her own schedule of visits that runs parallel to yours at the higher social level. You go to 4 houses. The first house is similar to yours, a small okiya with 3 active geisha and 2 maiko, run by a woman the Okasan's age who receives you with the formal tea and the exchange of New Year compliments that are their own precise script. Nothing left to improvise. The words established by tradition, the gestures established by tradition, the whole exchange functioning as a proof of membership as much as a greeting. The second house is larger, more established, with a reputation that extends beyond the Hanamechi into the wider city. The Okasan of this house is a woman named Kotobuki, whose name means congratulations or felicity, and whose face carries the marks of approximately 60 years of careful management. She looks at you with the particular attention of someone who assesses professionally and continuously. You bow. She nods, the way the Okasan nods when she's determined something. She says to older sister, "You're a younger one." "Yes," says older sister. Says Kotobuki-san. "You don't know what this means and you won't ask." The third house is smaller and poorer than yours, and there is a quality to the visit that is different, a slight adjustment of manner, a careful kindness that older sister demonstrates without drawing attention to it, the kindness of people who are more established toward people who are less, performed without condescension, but also without the fiction that everything is equal. The fourth house is larger and richer than yours, and the adjustment goes the other way. Slightly more formal, slightly more careful, the acknowledgement encoded in the bearing that this is a house whose reputation you aspire to rather than surpass. Walking between houses, the 5 or 6 minutes of being in the street, the cold air after the warmth of the formal rooms, you think about the social map of this district, how precisely maintained it is, how everyone knows their exact position in it, how the tea and the bowing and the New Year compliments are not just ritual but information, the whole ceremony transmitting data about who stands where and who's risen and who's fallen and what the current state of the relationships is, encoded in the specific qualities of each greeting. This is a thing you've been learning to read, the social grammar of the Hanamachi, which is almost a language in itself, with its own syntax of gesture and timing and the precise meanings of the various kinds of silence. You're still in the early vocabulary, but you're learning the grammar. February brings a change in the practice schedule that you didn't anticipate. The Okasan announces, on a Tuesday morning that begins like all the others with the floor and the cold and the shamisen, that you're going to begin practicing the Hanamichi walk. The Hanamichi, literally the flower path. In kabuki theatre, it's the long runway that extends from the stage into the audience, the path along which actors make their most significant entrances and exits, passing through the crowd rather than above it. The Hanamichi brings the performance into the space of the audience, collapses the distance. In the Hanamachi context, the Hanamichi walk refers to something different but related in spirit. The formal procession of the senior geisha and their maiko through the streets of the district during certain festivals, a public appearance that is both a display and a statement. The district presenting itself to the city, the women in their finest kimonos moving along the main street with the quality that makes people stop. You're not going to do this. Not this year. You're too new. But the Okasan wants the preparation to begin, because the preparation for a public procession requires its own kind of practice. A different quality of presence from what you've been developing in the closed rooms of the okiya. The difference, Yanagi-sensei explains on the morning she arrives to supervise the first session, is audience. In the teaching room, you perform for one person, sometimes two. The scale is intimate, the attention is focused, the environment is controlled. In the street procession, you're performing for everyone who happens to be present, which means strangers, which means people with no investment in your success, people who haven't paid for this, people whose attention you have to earn rather than assume. And you earn it, Yanagi-sensei says, not by doing more, but by doing less. You think about this. When the space is bigger, the impulse is to fill it. You want to make the gesture larger, the expression broader, the movement more obvious. You feel small in a big space and you want to compensate. She stands in the corridor, which is 8 steps of cypress floor with the garden at one end and the teaching room at the other. Not a big space, but she demonstrates the principle. She walks from one end to the other. 8 steps. You watch. The walk is the same walk she always has. The walk you see when she arrives and when she leaves. The walk that seems to have no beginning or end, but simply to be how she moves. Except now, watching it deliberately, in this context, you notice something. She's not filling the space, she is occupying it. There is a difference. Filling a space means spreading yourself across it, reaching for all its corners, making sure every part of it knows you're there. Occupying means placing yourself in the centre of it, completely, and letting the space arrange itself around you. She reaches the end of the corridor. She turns. Now you, she says, you walk. You know immediately that you're filling. You can feel it. The slight over-attention to your arms. The quality of self-consciousness that makes your steps feel demonstrative rather than natural. You reach the end. Again, she says. Again. 12 more times, and on the 13th time something settles, the way it settled in the dance lean after 6 repetitions, a quality of inevitability, as though this is just how you move. Yanagi-sensei watches. She says, there. Not better, not that's right, just there. The word that indicates arrival. You walk back from the end of the corridor toward her. 8 steps. Haruko, watching from the doorway of the teaching room with her chin almost at floor level, says nothing. But her eyes are different after this. March arrives with the first suggestion of spring, which in Japan announces itself through smell before it announces itself through temperature. The plum blossoms on the tree 2 streets over, the one you can see from the corridor window if you stand at the correct angle, which nobody told you about but which you discovered in your first march and have checked every morning since. Those blossoms carry a smell when the wind is right that cuts through the residual winter cold with a precision that is almost startling, sweet and faintly spiced. The smell of the tree deciding that winter is over regardless of what the thermometer says. The Oka-san notices you noticing this. She comes to stand beside you one morning at the window, both of you looking at the distant pink-white in the bare branches. Ume, she says. Plum? Yes. A pause. The smell is present even here, even through the slight cold of the window frame. My grandmother had a neem tree, she says. In the garden of her house in Kyoto, she used to make umashu from the fruit. The whole house smelled of it in summer. You don't say anything. You know by now that the Oka-san's rare personal disclosures require space rather than response. I haven't been to Kyoto in 12 years, she says. Then she turns and goes back to her work. You stay at the window for another moment. The plum tree, Kyoto, 12 years, the grandmother. You're doing what you always do, filing it, building the picture, adding this fragment to the archive you're compiling of the person whose house you live in. She was a young woman once who noticed plum trees. This seems obvious and also important. The spring brings changes to the performance schedule. The cherry blossom viewing season in April is one of the year's major social events in Edo, and the Geisha and Maiko of the Hanamachi are part of it, attending the famous viewing parties that happen under the blossoming trees in the parks and along the river. These events are different from the formal evenings in the okiya. They're larger, looser, the whole city given permission to celebrate in a way it can't the rest of the year. The cherry blossoms last 10 days, sometimes 8, sometimes 12, but never long enough. The Japanese know this and build it into the appreciation, the brevity being part of the point, the blossoms being beautiful, partly because they are about to fall, a thing that flowers everywhere but that the Japanese formalize and name and grieve and celebrate simultaneously. Mono no aware, the pathos of things, the particular Japanese quality of loving something for its transience. Everything is more precious for being about to end. This is a concept that has personal relevance to you in ways you don't fully examine. The cherry blossom party you attend is under the trees along the Sumida River, the great river that runs north to south through the eastern part of the city. You've seen the Sumida from a distance, from the bridge crossings you've made, and from the boat when you and Haruko went to Nihonbashi. But this is the first time you've stood on its bank with nothing particular to do except be present. The trees here are enormous, old, planted in rows along both banks, and in full blossom they produce a canopy so dense that the sky is only visible in patches between the white-pink clouds of flowers. The smell is different from the plum, lighter, more delicate, almost not there. And this is also part of the cherry blossom aesthetic, the suggestion rather than the statement, the smell that arrives and departs in pulses with the breeze, rather than maintaining a constant presence. You have to catch it. It doesn't come to you. The party is formal enough to require the full evening makeup and the best kimono, but informal enough that you're not confined to a room. You move between groups with older sister, and you're introduced to people you've not met before, acquaintances of the house's patrons, people who come once a year for the blossom viewing and whose connection to the Hanamachi is seasonal and occasional. A man named Fuji, who is perhaps 45, a scholar of some kind, you gather, in the history of the earlier periods of Japanese culture, notices the bowl you've wrapped in cloth and are carrying on behalf of the Okasan. Not the Sato bowl, a different bowl, one that the Okasan is bringing as a gift for the host of the party. "May I see it?" he asks. You unwrap it. He takes it from you with the hands of someone who handles objects carefully, not roughly, but with a quality of attention. "This is from the early Edo period," he says. He's examining the foot ring, which is where the technical information is usually most visible. The glaze style, this particular quality of translucence. You see this in the work of the kilns in Seto, the ones that were establishing themselves in the early 17th century. The foot ring is cut with a tool, not trimmed by hand. He looks up at you. He has the quality of someone who assumes you might be interested in this, which is unusual in a way you notice without making visible. The Okasan values it, you say. She has excellent taste, he hands it back. Do you study ceramics? Not professionally, as part of the general education. We learn to look, to understand what we're looking at. That's the foundation, he says. He considers something. There's a collection in a merchant's house in Kanda, a man named Ogata, who has the finest collection of early Edo ware in the city. Perhaps the finest private collection in the country. He shows it occasionally by appointment to serious students. He produces a small card from his sleeve, gives it to you. Tell him Fuji sent you. He'll show you what you asked to see. You take the card. Thank you. It's nothing, he says, with a particular dismissal that means it isn't nothing but that acknowledging it would be impolite. He moves off into the party. The cherry blossoms come loose from the branches in small flurries when the wind moves through the trees, and the ground at the base of each trunk is accumulating a slow drift of fallen petals, white going pale brown at the edges, the flowers in the process of becoming the ground. A few have fallen on the surface of the river and are moving downstream with the current, carried toward wherever the river goes. You stand for a moment with the wrapped bowl in both hands and look at the petals on the water. There's a particular quality to this moment. The blossoms and the river and the party behind you, and the bowl in your hands and the card from the scholar tucked in your sleeve, and the smell that arrives and departs and arrives again. Something that contains too much to name simply. Something that could be happiness, that has the texture of happiness, though it also has the texture of awareness, which is not quite the same thing, and awareness of what, exactly? Of being here, of this particular arrangement of circumstances that will never recur in exactly this form, this light and this river and these specific flowers losing the last of their grip on the branches. Mono no aware. You feel it as a physical thing, a slight ache in the chest that is not pain. Then older sister is at your elbow and it's time to move to the next group. You move. Spring becomes summer, becomes autumn again. The seasons moving through the okiya the way water moves through the canals, continuously, with the same rhythms and the same changes at the same points, the tatami being replaced in autumn, the tokonoma scroll changing with each month, the okasan pruning the pine tree on the second Sunday of every month, the shamisen practice at 4 a.m, the dance lesson at 8, the tea ceremony in the afternoon, the evenings with their preparations and their performances and their removing of the makeup and the cool cloth and the face underneath. In June, older sister's contract ends. Her 7 years are complete. She has passed through all the stages from Maiko to junior geisha to established geisha, and the debt that brought her to the okiya has been paid, calculated to the last mon. The okasan hosts a dinner for her. Formal, respectful, the acknowledgement of service rendered and years given, and the debt between teacher and student, which runs in both directions. You help prepare the dinner, you serve it, and at the end of the evening, when the guests have gone and the house is quiet, older sister finds you in the corridor. She's different already, even before she's actually left. Something in her posture has changed, a tension gone, a maintained quality released. She stands differently. She looks at you differently. You're ready, she says. Not for a specific thing, just ready. For what, you ask? For whatever comes next. A pause. She's not given to sentiment, older sister, and what she does next is the most personal thing she's ever done with you. She reaches out and adjusts the collar of your kimono, which is perfectly fine and doesn't need adjusting, but the gesture means something else, a laying on of hands that contains something she can't say in words. Then she removes her hands. Her face returns to its composed state. The shamisen, she says. Your attack is almost there. Don't overthink the third string. She walks away down the corridor. The next morning you take her place in the teaching room. First position. The position from the tokonoma. The new girl who arrived last month, 14 years old from somewhere in Suruga province, is at the other end of the room in what used to be your position. Her name here is Setsuko, Snow Child, and she holds her shamisen with the quality of controlled fear that you recognize absolutely. You play the opening phrase. She watches. You play it again, slightly differently. The third string asking permission rather than stating. She tries to mirror it. The sound is not yet right, but the intention is there. You can hear the intention in it. You say, because it's the first useful thing older sister ever said to you directly. Softer on the third. It should feel like asking permission. She adjusts slightly better. You say, again. This is the mechanism of the thing. This is how it passes. From hand to hand, from position to position, from the woman who held this before you, to this girl who will hold it after you. The knowledge embodied and transmitted through the body, through sitting in a cold room at 4 a.m. for years, through the correction of the wrist and the adjustment of the beichi, and the patient repetition, until the thing moves from the mind into the body and becomes automatic. This is what's being preserved, not just the music, not just the technique, the willingness to keep doing it. The willingness to sit with the cold in the floor and the ache in the knees and the small daily humiliations and still show up. You sit in the first position. You play. Outside the garden window, the winter light is doing its thing, transforming the pine tree briefly into something that exists between a plant and a brushstroke. The needles lit from below by the low December sun. The 3 stones in the garden cast their long, thin shadows. The sukubai in its corner holds the perfect disk of morning ice. December again, a year and a bit, and another morning beginning the way all the mornings begin, with the floor and the cold and the instrument. You think about what Yanagi-sensei said that first autumn, about grief having mass, about the lean containing real weight. You think about the Okasan saying, I just cried and kept dancing. You think about older sister's hand on your collar, adjusting what didn't need adjusting. The girl in the corner position plays the phrase again. It's slightly better, not yet right, but pointed in the right direction. Again, you say. The shamisen makes its dry buzzing sound. The garden is cold and still and lit. The day has begun. Now we're going to move forward through time, the way time actually moves in a place like this. Not smoothly, but in compressions and expansions. Some days enormous and slow, and others gone before you can locate them in memory. It's been 2 years since older sister left. You're 17 now. Not quite older sister's age when she initiated. Not quite there. But moving toward it with the inexorability of a tide that has a specific shore it's going to reach regardless of what happens between here and there. In these 2 years, things have changed in ways that are both more and less than you expected when you imagined what change would look like. You are better at everything. The shamisen has passed through competence into something approaching artistry on the best days, which are not all days, but are more days than before. The dance practice with Yanagi-sensei has produced, in the last 6 months, 4 different moments in which she has said something in the vicinity of approval, which is a rate of approximately 1 meaningful moment every 6 weeks of practice, which is either frustratingly sparse or remarkable progress, depending on your frame of reference. The tea ceremony has become, on the afternoons when everything is right, genuinely peaceful rather than disciplined. You sit in the tea room, and the ceremony proceeds through you rather than being done by you, and there are moments in it that you would call, if you were using the vocabulary, meditative. The silence having weight and quality. The sound of the kettle, matsukaze, pine wind, the bowl complete in your hands. Setsuko, the girl from Suruga province, is no longer the new girl. There are 2 new girls now, both younger than you, both in the stages you remember from your own beginning, both looking at the shamisen with the expression of controlled terror. You manage them the way older sister managed you, which is to say, with the minimum of direct intervention, with the trust that the practice itself is the teacher, and your role is to maintain the conditions for the practice. You're not older sister yet, but you're not the girl you were. The distinction is visible, not to you, not primarily, but you know it's visible because of the way certain things happen now that didn't happen before. The way Yamamoto-san defers to your recommendation when you tell him the evening's program. The way the okiya-san occasionally asks your opinion on something before she decides. The way the guests at the evening sometimes stay later than they planned. This last thing, the staying. You noticed it first in a specific evening last autumn, a late October night when a poet named Keijiro, who was a new patron, who came for the first time with a merchant friend who'd been coming for years, who sat in the corner of the main room with the slightly guarded quality of someone who isn't sure if they belong here, who drank his sack slowly and listened to the shamisen with an attention you recognized, because it was the attention you give to things you've been waiting to hear. You talked with him during the interval, about nothing specific, about the autumn and the persimmons that were appearing in the market, and the particular quality of October light in this district when the maple trees turn. And the conversation went somewhere, developed its own momentum, became a thing rather than an exchange of pleasantries. He stayed 2 hours past when the merchant friend left. When he finally went, he paused at the door and said, not with the complimentary excess of a pleased patron, but with the flat directness of someone saying a true thing, I didn't expect to be so interested. You bowed. He came back the following month. This is what the okiya-san meant when she said, you sell an atmosphere. You sell the feeling of being in a room with someone who has mastered the art of being completely present. Not beautiful, though beauty is present. Not skilled, though skill is present. Present. Actually here, giving the full attention to the full person without agenda, without the performance of interest that is different from actual interest. You're learning to do this. It requires, paradoxically, that you care less about the performance of presence and more about the actual content of the conversation. The more you're genuinely interested in what Keijiro the poet is saying about persimmons and October light, the more fully you're in the room, and the more fully you're in the room, the better the evening is. The performance doesn't disappear. The technique doesn't disappear. But underneath the technique there is something real, and the technique now serves the real thing rather than substituting for it. Yanagi-sensei, when you tell her about this, says simply, now you understand what dance is for. You do. You think you do. This November is different from the Novembers before it in one specific way that you've known about since September, and that has been both a motivating and a slightly terrifying fact in the back of your consciousness. The okiya-san has announced that you will participate in the autumn festival procession, the Hanamichi walk, the public procession, the thing you've been preparing for since February of your first year, the thing Yanagi-sensei was orienting you toward with the corridor walks and the not filling but occupying. The autumn festival of the Hanamachi is not the largest event of the year. The spring cherry blossom parties are larger in terms of attendance and social significance, but it is the most public, the one that goes into the street rather than staying in rooms, the one that the neighbourhood and the passers-by and the merchants and the children and everyone who happens to be on the main street that afternoon will see. The date is fixed. The kimono is already selected, discussed, decided, the okiya-san spending a significant part of an October afternoon making the choice, with the combination of aesthetic precision and practical intelligence that she brings to every significant decision. It's the silk you've admired since it arrived in the house a year ago, the one with the wisteria pattern in deep purple on a field of silver grey, a colour that in certain lights looks almost blue and in others almost white, and the flowers falling across it in the diagonal that classical Japanese textile design prefers, the diagonal implying movement, things in the process of happening. The morning of the procession, you wake before the bell. Not because your body has learned a new rhythm, but because there is a quality of wakefulness in you that makes sleep impossible past a certain point. You lie in the dark for perhaps 5 minutes, listening to the city which is already moving, the canal and the distant temple bells and the beginnings of the day's commerce. You think, today. Then you get up. The morning practice proceeds as usual. The shamisen, the singing, the dance. Yanagi-sensei comes for the dance session and spends most of it on the Hanamichi walk rather than the usual pieces, returning repeatedly to the corridor, walking you through the quality of the procession step, the particular relationship between the body and the space that a street requires as opposed to a room. "You're ready," she says finally, in the corridor with the garden at one end and the teaching room at the other. She doesn't say it the way older sister said it. Older sister said it as an acknowledgement of trajectory. Yanagi-sensei says it as an assessment, a technical fact. You bow. "Thank you." She nods. One nod, the long one. The preparation for the afternoon begins at noon. The makeup today is slightly different from the usual evening version, fuller in one sense, the white more complete. The detail around the eyes more precise because this will be seen from a distance, will be seen by people who don't have the controlled intimacy of the main room and whose assessment will happen in the few seconds of a glance from street level. But lighter in another sense, because the afternoon light is different from lamplight, and too much of the evening makeup in daylight can read as excessive, as too much wanting. The kimono, the wisteria and the silver grey. Tomo's hands at the obi, certain and practised as always, the weight settling on your shoulders. The kanzashi today are chrysanthemums, the November flower, in gold and pale yellow. You look in the mirror. There is the face, the performance face, and underneath it, the face that exists between performances, the one with the real skin and the real eyes. Both of them real, both of them you. The procession assembles at the entrance of the main Hanamachi street at 2 in the afternoon. There are 8 women from 4 houses, including 2 fully established senior geisha and 3 maiko of varying stages. The oka-san is present as the representative of your house, wearing her most formal kimono, standing slightly behind the line of women, with the quality of someone who has sent these processions out before and is watching the current one with the precision of an expert. The street itself has been prepared. The merchants have put out their best displays. There are small lanterns already hung, ready for when the light changes, not lit yet but present, the framework of the evening already in place in the afternoon. People have gathered, not a crowd exactly, but a lining of observers along both sides of the street, the casual and the intentional mixed together, the family out for an afternoon walk who happened to encounter this, and the person who knew it was happening and came specifically, both of them now standing at the edge of the street and watching. You stand in your assigned position. Third from the front. The senior geisha who is leading, a woman named Momiji, Maple Leaf, who's been in the Hanamachi for 25 years and carries that history in the quality of her presence, the way old buildings carry their history in their beams, takes the first step. The procession moves. The step, the small step, feet slightly inward, weight forward on the balls of the feet, the whole body from a stable centre. the obi at your back adding its trailing weight, the wisteria on the silk catching the afternoon light in the way the Okasan saw when she chose it, the colour shifting with the angle of the sun, the purple becoming blue, the silver becoming almost white. The first 20 steps are mostly technique. You're aware of everything. Your feet, your hands in their position, the weight of the kanzashi, the quality of your face. You're filling the space rather than occupying it. You know this. You can feel the difference. Then something happens. Something that doesn't have a precise cause. A child near the edge of the street, maybe 5 years old, is watching the procession with the specific intensity that small children bring to things they find extraordinary. A wide-eyed, completely unself-conscious staring that has nothing to do with social convention and everything to do with pure response. And when you pass this child, for 1 second you are inside their perception, seeing yourself as they see you, not with the self-consciousness of someone performing, but with the sudden clarity of something seen from outside. You are the thing you've been trying to become, not completely, not permanently, but right now, in this moment, in the afternoon light on this street with the wisteria on the silk and the chrysanthemums in the hair, and 17 years of accumulated everything in the body, you are the thing. You stop filling the space, you occupy it. The next steps happen without the commentary. Feet, yes. Weight, yes. Hands, yes. But below all of that, as the ground is below everything, the thing that Yanagi-sensei has been trying to reach with 2 years of corridor walks and dance corrections, and the question about watching someone you didn't want to leave, that thing is present. You are here, completely here. Not performing here, not demonstrating here, just inhabiting this specific configuration of street and light and silk and body. Someone in the crowd says something you don't hear, a phrase too quiet or too fast, but the quality of it is recognizable as the sound of someone who has seen what they came to see. You walk the full length of the street. You turn at the far end with the other women. You walk back. 20 minutes. The procession is 20 minutes. When it ends, when you're standing at the entry point again and the crowd is dispersing, and the Okasan is coming forward with that assessing look that registers everything and shows nothing, you feel something in your body that takes a moment to identify. Not triumph, not relief. The relief is present. Something quieter, neither. The feeling of something having been placed that was missing. A piece in the architecture of yourself, located and set. The Okasan reaches you. She looks at you for one long moment. Come, she says, which means inside, which means the day continues, which means there's a lesson in the afternoon and dinner to help with and an evening ahead. You follow. The evening comes. The makeup goes on. The more familiar lamplight calibrated version. The layers of the transformation that you do now with the ease of long practice. The clients arrive. Yamamoto-san is here, and Keijiro the poet, and 2 men you haven't met before who have the bearing of merchants from somewhere outside Edo, Osaka maybe. The cadence of the Kansai accent audible underneath their careful Edo speech. You serve, you converse, you pour sake with the slight tilt and the stop before full. Keijiro, when you sit across from him in the interval between the main entertainment and the later, more relaxed part of the evening, says, "You were in the procession today." "Yes, I saw it." A pause. He turns his cup in his fingers the way people do when they're choosing their words. There's something different about seeing it in the street. In a room like this, it's intimate. In the street, it's something else. What is it in the street, he thinks? It's the city seeing itself. The city looking at what it has created and deciding it's worth the bother. He drinks. You consider this for a moment. The city seeing itself. Is the city worth the bother, you ask? He looks at you. This is a question that could be several different questions depending on how it's meant, and he's taking a moment to determine which one it is. Yes, he says simply, it is. He refills your cup because poets do things slightly backwards, and you let him, because this is the informal part of the evening and the strict formalities have relaxed, and because there is something in letting him pour that acknowledges the equal weight of the conversation between you. Late that night, after the guests have gone and the makeup is off, and the kimono is folded and the house is settling into its nighttime sounds, you sit on the edge of the veranda in the back garden. The December cold, the pine tree, the frozen sukubai, the stars are visible tonight, which is not always the case in Edo, where the charcoal smoke and the cooking fires, and the sheer thermal output of 1 million people tends to blur the sky. But the wind has been from the east today, and it's cleared the air, and the stars are sharp and very numerous, the way they are only when the air is clean. You look at them. Somewhere in Kozuki province, your mother is also under these stars. The village with its fields and its rice paddies and the sound of the river that runs past the southern edge. The river that eventually becomes part of the water system that carries everything to Edo. The same water that's in the canal outside this house might have come past your mother's door. 14 months since the last letter. You should write. You will write. Tomorrow, or the day after, in the time after lunch that is technically free time and is actually an accumulation of tasks and small educations and the practice of being yourself in the spaces between obligations. The pine tree moves in the wind that has cleared the sky. You're 17 years old. You're 2 years further along the arc of the debt. You are, according to the Oka-san's last accounting, which she shares with you quarterly, slightly ahead of schedule, because the evenings have been good and the reputation of the house has grown in the year since older sister left, and the 2 new patrons who came through Keijiro's network have been generous. You will not finish early, but you will not finish late. There are more years, more mornings at 4, more floors, more aching knees and tired feet, and the particular hunger of a life lived at the edge of sufficiency. Always enough and never more than that, because more than enough is a luxury that comes later, that comes after the debt is paid, and you are something other than an apprentice. But this night, the stars, the pine tree in the cold, this is the thing that nobody pays for, and that is therefore, in a specific way, entirely yours. The city makes its sounds, the canal, the distant bells, the last of the evening's tavern noise softening toward midnight, the sound of a city containing 1 million lives, all of them continuing past the point where any one of them is watching. You breathe in the cold air, the pine resin, the last trace of the day's charcoal smoke, and then we move forward again, the way we always do, through the rest of winter and into another spring, the plum blossoms and then the cherry blossoms and then the long hot summer, with the river smelling of itself, and the cicadas in the city's few remaining trees making a sound so loud it functions as silence in its own right, and then the autumn again, the light doing its thing through the pine needles, the tatami being replaced, the tokonoma scroll changing to the brushwork crane in the snow. The years have a shape now. You can see the shape because you've lived enough of them to trace the outline. The shape isn't a line, not a simple progression from one state to another. It's more like the cross-section of a tree, ring after ring, adding something that changes the whole without erasing what was already there. You can still find the girl who arrived from Kozuke province, with the cold floor and the uncertain shamisen and the face that told things she didn't intend. She's still in there. She's the centre of the ring. Everything since has grown around her. What changes and what doesn't. The floor is still cold in winter. The Okasan's eyes still register everything and show nothing. Yanagi-sensei still arrives at 8, with her indigo kimono and her 40 years of knowledge in her hands. The shamisen still requires the third string to ask permission. The tea bowl with its chipped rim is still the practice bowl, still present in the tea room, still oriented with the floor toward the hand. What changes? The relationship between you and all of these things, the distance between what you know and what you can do with what you know, the quality of presence in the room during an evening, the ability to be in the corridor while listening for the bell and simultaneously choosing the tea bowl for the morning, and planning the line of the conversation, and reading the room's social topology without showing that you're doing any of it, the integration, the thing that Yanagi-sensei walks toward, the thing that the Okasan already has and that you can see has been built layer by layer across 41 years. The seasons turn, the practice continues, the debt decreases, and the hours that nobody pays for, the hours before the lamp lights and after it goes out, those hours are doing their own kind of accounting, building the only thing that can't be put in the ledger, can't be subtracted from the debt, can't be taken back even when everything else can. The thing that you know, the thing in your hands, the thing in the angle of the lean and the quality of the pour and the sound of the shamisen asking permission from the third string. Nobody paid for those hours, but nobody can take them either. Now. Let me tell you about an evening in November, 4 years into your time in the house, when you are 19 years old, and the distinction between what you're performing and what you are has become so thin as to be almost irrelevant. The guest that evening is someone new, a scholar like Fuji who gave you the card for the ceramic collection, but younger, perhaps 35, with the quality of someone who works primarily in his head and has given the body somewhat less attention than it might warrant, the clothing slightly imprecise, the hair slightly unattended, the kind of person who would rather be in a library but has been brought here by a colleague who insists he needs to leave the library sometimes. His name is Tanaka. He teaches at one of the academies you gather, history or philosophy or something that sits at the intersection, one of those disciplines whose practitioners live partly in the present and partly in several centuries that have already passed. He is uncomfortable for the first half hour, visibly uncomfortable, the quality of discomfort that comes from being in a social situation that requires a performance you haven't rehearsed. The tea and the conversation and the particular atmosphere of the okiya being things he knows about theoretically and has not experienced in practice. You watch this. You read the discomfort the way you read any room. You say, after the initial formal exchange, not in the performance tone, but in the genuine voice you're learning to use in conversations that need it. What are you working on? He looks at you as though you've said something unexpected. I'm sorry. Your research. What are you working on? A pause. He recalibrates, decides to answer. The history of urban aesthetics, he says. Specifically, the question of how a city develops an aesthetic sensibility, how the practices and the built environment and the social structures all produce a particular quality of beauty that's specific to a time and a place. You consider this, like what we do here. He looks at you again. This time the look is different. Yes, he says, exactly like what you do here. A pause. Most people would say it's very different from what happens in ordinary parts of the city. The practice isn't different, you say. We spend years learning to make things beautiful. The shogunate spends years maintaining the city streets. The craftsmen spend years perfecting the ceramics and the lacquerware and the silk. The farmers who grow the rice that feeds 1 million people spend years learning their fields. It's the same impulse. He's quiet, looking at you. I didn't expect that answer, he says. What did you expect? Something more modest, he says, and then with a slight unexpected quality of humour, or something less relevant. This is the conversation. This is what you've been building toward. Not the technique of the paw, or the precision of the bow, or even the quality of the shamisen playing, though all of those are required in order to get here, in order to create the conditions in which a conversation like this becomes possible. The whole apparatus, the practice and the performance and the debt and the cold floors, all of it in service of this. A room in which a person can say something true to another person who is actually listening. You talk for an hour about urban aesthetics and the hanamachi and the question of whether beauty is something created or discovered, or whether the distinction is meaningful, and about what Sen no Rikyu understood when he made people bow through a small door to enter the tea room, and whether that principle applies to modern tea ceremony, and about the specific quality of Edo's beauty, which is different from Kyoto's, which is different from Osaka's, each city having a distinct aesthetic personality shaped by its history and its geography and its relationship to power. Tanaka talks with his hands, not expressively, not dramatically, but with the precision of someone who is used to using gesture to locate concepts in space. Pointing at the air in front of him when he names an idea as though it's actually there. When he leaves, he turns at the door and says, I would like to write about this. About what? About the aesthetic education, about what happens in houses like this, about the question of whether it's possible to teach someone to create beauty, or whether you're really teaching them to notice what's already there. Both, you say. It's both. He nods slowly. He goes. The Oka-san is in the corridor. She heard at least part of this. You suspect she hears most things in this house. She says nothing for a moment. Then, he'll come back. I know, you say. She looks at you. Something in her face is slightly different. The thing that happens occasionally. The slight opening in the composed surface. The moment where the wall between Oka-san and person becomes briefly thinner. You're ready, she says. Not the way older sister said it. Not the way Yanagi-sensei said it. The way the Oka-san says it is different from both. It is not about trajectory. It is not about technical achievement. It is simply, you have arrived at the thing we've been trying to reach. You bow. The deep bow, held for the count, the spine straight. When you straighten, she's already turned away, walking back toward her room with the quality of movement she always has, carrying the weight of the house in the quality of her spine. The lamp in the corridor throws its familiar orange light. You go to remove the makeup. The cloth, warm, the white coming off in slow circles. The face underneath appearing, reddish from the bath, slightly asymmetric at the brow, the small irregularity that the makeup corrects and that your mother gave you, the same slight asymmetry you saw in her face and that you used to think was a flaw until you understood that it was the human mark, the trace of the particular person inside the general category of face. You look at it. Not the performance face, not the between performances face, just the face. Both of them, the white and the red, the smooth and the irregular, the 17 layers of practice and the one original thing underneath. Both real, both you. The city outside makes its late-night sounds. The canal, the bells, the last of the evening's voices softening toward the hours when even Edo quiets down enough to be heard. Tomorrow, 4 in the morning, the bells, the floor, the cold, the shamisen. Tonight, this moment. The makeup coming off in slow circles, the lamp making everything slightly golden, the pine tree in the garden holding its shape in the dark. There's something you understand now that you couldn't have understood 4 years ago. The debt is a real thing. The contract is a real thing. The hierarchy that determines who eats first and who speaks first and who holds the position by the tukonoma is real. None of that is pretense. And also, the hours that nobody pays for are the ones where the person you actually are gets made. The 4 a.m. floor with its cold coming up through the cypress planks. The small private pleasure of washing your own hair in the hinoki bath. The walk to Nihonbashi in December with the bowl wrapped in silk against your body. The child at the edge of the street during the procession. The child whose wide-eyed looking suddenly put you inside your own presence. These are yours. The debt belongs to the house. The debt will be paid when it's paid. But these hours, these specific configurations of cold air and pine resin, and the sound of the shamisen in a room that smells of rush grass and old silk, these belong to you in a way that can't be contracted away, can't be calculated in the ledger, can't be given back. You have been here, completely here. This is the only thing that no one can ever take. The lamp gutters slightly. A small movement of air from under the door. You finish clean in the face. You go upstairs. The attic room, the futon, the familiar cold that turns to warmth as your body heats the space around it. Setsuko's breathing from her side of the mattress, slow and steady. The breathing of someone who's had a full day and has nothing left. Outside, the last temple bell of the night sounds from somewhere across the water. The resonance hangs in the air above the city for its full length, the bronze finding its way through the cold air to every room, every corridor, every person lying in the dark in the greatest city in the world, all of them in their separate silences, all of them connected by the sound. You hear it all the way through. Centuries will pass. The Edo you know will become Tokyo, though you have no word for what it will become. The canals will be filled in and paved over. The Hanamachi will contract and change, and some of it will disappear, and some of it will survive in different forms, smaller, more deliberately preserved, the way something is preserved when it becomes rare. The shamisen will still be played. The tea ceremony will still require the turn of the bowl and the correct number of sips. The tatami will still smell of the sea when it's new, but there will still be rooms in the early morning where someone kneels on a cold floor and practices something difficult, because the difficult thing is the thing worth doing. There will still be hands learning to hold an instrument with the quality of permission rather than force. There will still be women and men and children trying to understand the difference between performing beauty and occupying it. Some things don't change. The desire to make something that holds more than it appears to contain. That particular human impulse, that doesn't change. The city will still make its sounds in the middle of the night. Different sounds, different sources, but the same texture underneath all of them. The sound of lives continuing, lives in the process of being lived, lives that began before the lamp went out and will continue after the sun comes up. And you, wherever you are in this moment, listening to this, you are in that same texture. The same city that never fully sleeps, whatever city that is, wherever you are in it or outside it. You are one of the million lives continuing past the point where anyone is watching. Your work today and your practice and your errands and your conversations and the small private pleasures that belong to no one else. All of that is in you the way the cypress floor is in the okiya, as the actual foundation of the thing, invisible but weight-bearing. Let the shamisen put down its last note. Let the lamp decide to rest. Let the sound of the canal carry whatever it's carrying toward wherever it goes. You have been here today. That's not nothing. That's everything. Let sleep come the way it comes, the way the tide comes, gradually and then completely. Let the 4 a.m. floor recede. Let the cold and the ache and the hunger and the longing for what isn't here recede. Let the weight of the evening's performance and the morning's practice and the long work of becoming settle to the bottom. What remains, floating clear at the surface, is simple. You are warm enough, fed enough, rested enough. You have learned enough today to have tomorrow. The pine tree is in the garden. The stars are there above the smoke. The bowl in the tea room has its chipped rim. Your fingers will find it in the morning. Let it all be enough, because it is. It is. The temple bell makes its sound somewhere across the water, long, slow, complete, and then quiet. And then the quiet that is fuller than the quiet before, the quiet that has received the bell and is still holding the space where the sound was. Sleep in that space. That's where it's warm. That's where the practice and the performance and the debt and the years all dissolve into the single simple fact of a person resting at the end of a day that cost what it cost and gave what it gave. Good night.